here's what we're going to do, and I hope to get some, we have just enough time to, if any of you have questions too, that you've really wondered about. And Garret is here to ask some of these questions that have come up. But there's one in particular I'd like to bring up right now that is not on the cards. And that is that someone brought up I don't see him here, Robert Morrow, but he brought up something very interesting. He said, I don't believe that Lee Oswald would have ever obtained the name of his handler. Now, he said, because Vestiana never found out, he always thought it was Bishop. In my book, I mentioned that Lee has very much concern about the name of his handler because the handler wasn't consistent. With Vestiana, it was always Bishop, 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 but Lee was lower on the totem pole and he forgot. We know that Atlee Phillips used at least 50 different names, fake names of all the people he was running, Atlee, and different things he was doing. A lot of different names. And I think David would agree with me about that. He knows more than I do about how all these acronyms, and names, and everything they were using. But what concerns me, I hope they can turn on the lights so I can see you guys. I'm having to wear these glasses because my eyes are too sore right now. So is there any way we can get the lights turned on?
The lights are up.
Oh, it was me.
Not all of them.
But my eyes are so sore.
Not all of them.
I'm afraid it's ugly. Anyway, all right, let me continue. Okay, so here's the difficulty. Yes, Vestiana only got one name. He didn't get just one name. First he got Benson or Benton. And then he got Bishop because the guy forgot. Now Lee's got two names now, so he knows they're fake names. He's pretty sure they're fake names. And when he went to Mexico City, which he did do, okay, right? And we'll talk about that later. When he went to Mexico City, when he couldn't get the material dropped off because nobody showed, he just left holding the bag. He tried to contact through a cutout to reach Hunt. Actually, Hunt was there in Mexico City. A lot of people don't know that, but I talked to St. John, his son, about that, and he's collected so much stuff on his father, and he endorses me. All that. But anyway, and he said the guy you want to talk to is flown back to Fort Worth. That was a great clue for Lee. Okay. Now here's the thing. Since Lee, it says in my book, me and Lee, and then of course Lee Harvey Oswald being the same thing, that he was hunting for his name. It's not like, oh gee, I wonder. But no, he was really wanting to know who this person was. It's so important. And because of that, because he was raised in that area and he had a lot of contacts, because he was operative in that area, he eventually found out that it had to be this person, the person in Fort Worth that had going back and forth was, I think he said it was, he found out that somebody said that he worked for Radio Swan and he knew that was David Atlee Phillips. He said, I'm not sure. And that's a very important word, 3 words there, I'm not sure. Because he didn't say, I know for sure. But he said, I don't want you to forget that name because I think he's a traitor. And he was. So I just want to add that. Somebody said, no, it's impossible he would have found the name. Well, I'm telling you because he was diligent to try to find him and because he lived in that area. It's not like he lived in Sacramento, California, all right? He knew that area and he was able, he's not stupid. He figured it out. And I've heard that some of the people in the research community says, well, Oswald never would have found out the name of his handler and therefore, I'm not telling the truth. So I had a 45-minute argument yesterday with somebody about that. And he said, let's just agree that you just forgot or something, or that you're just making it up. Okay, that's just want to get that. So we're going to talk about some of these different points. And Garret here is going to assist me. I'm just so happy to have him. And this is a great attorney. And I'd like you to introduce who you are a little bit, what you do for people, because he does some great things.
Well, thank you, Judith.
Yes,
I'll do it briefly because we got to get to these, but I'm one of Judith's attorneys and honored to be your friend. Thank you for asking me to participate. I'm from Michigan, and the main areas of law I focus on are disability and workplace injuries, but take a lawyer's interest in all of these issues. I was interested in the Kennedy assassination for a long time, and then I read Me and Lee, and everything changed and accelerated. And I went to my first conference in 2019, and I've been a big follower of Judyth ever since. The things we're going to talk about, for the most part, if not all, are in her book, so they'll sound familiar, but these are things that she wanted to emphasize and further explain for you. And then there'll be time for questions at the end. So let's start with this.
Yeah, we've got 15 minutes. We'll do what we can in 15 minutes, and we'll do more the next time we meet.
Why did Lee think you were CIA?
Oh, yeah. Lee thought it was CIA for a bunch of reasons. And of course, I didn't know that, but why he would confide in me and all that kind of thing. I think it started because when he was mentioning that he was interested in Cuba, and we talked about that I mentioned Tony Lopez Fresquet. And Tony and I, we really got close and we're dating and everything in high school. Tony had come in from refugee because his mother Helen was from American, but he was half Cuban and half American. His daddy was Rufo Lopez Fresquet, who was Castro's own finance minister. So I'm dating the son of the Castro's finance minister, and I had not heard of Tony. I don't know, been some months, but so since Lee knew so much about Cuba and all that, I asked him if he knew maybe where Tony was, and he said, "Well, we're trying to find Tony." So here I am trying to find Tony, and they're trying to find Tony, and that's all that made him think that I was involved like he was that way. That was the first thing. The second thing is that when we met, I used to use some Russian phrases to break the ice when I was flirting with guys, and in the whole post office, around all these drunkards and other people that were in New Orleans, and some, they're not going to send an old geezer. You see, I didn't realize that. I thought it was all an accident, but I've been convinced that he was sent to rescue me from the strippers and the other people I was associating with at the time, because I was an asset. And they sent Lee. And we know that Lee now, I know now, and of course I finally found out back then even that Lee was there to protect the project and to attract anybody who was pro-Castro or who was a spy of Castro's. Castro sent people there to New Orleans so that they would try to find the people who were against Castro and kill them. So, I mean, Lee is there to find these people out. He's pretending to be pro-Castro so he can get into that group. He wasn't pro-Castro. Okay, so that's the background story. There's a lot more, but the fact I could speak Russian because I spoke Russian to him, and that shocked him. How many people do you run into if you say a Russian phrase and he answers back in Russian? Oh, wow, who is this? And then when I was working out at Royal Castle, I was only taking 45 minutes to get out there, working 2 hours, and then 45 minutes to get back. Who does that? Well, I just had to pay for my rent at the wide WCA, and that's all I was interested in until they came back. But I did not know that Bobby Kennedy had his surveillance team there, of course, but Lee did because he was involved, all right, with Bobby Kennedy's efforts to watch Castro, and why his own uncle, of course, was associated with Castro, and here he is, trusted by the CIA. And Bobby Kennedy knew about Lee Oswald, and I don't know how much he knew, but he knew he was involved. And Lee knew that, had to know Bobby Kennedy's surveillance team out there from that Department of Justice, not FBI, is watching because they are going to try and deport Marcelo again, and they're observing. Royal Castle is open 24 hours a day, so they're watching the traffic, which is a couple blocks away. They can see the license plate on every car. So Lee thinks that maybe I'm a courier. I mean, I'm only there 2 hours every morning, early morning. Oh, I'm getting the night's stuff, and sending it back over to some office for Bobby Kennedy. I mean, what is he thinking? What? What? Yeah, they were they're surveilling Marcelo over at Town and Country. Town and Country is where Marcella's office was as well. Okay, so there are many more things. You'll find them in the book. That'll give you an idea, though, why Lee started trusting me. Okay.
What does Portia and Brutus and Julius Caesar have to do with you convincing Lee to confide in you?
All right. Trying to get Lee to confide in me was like pulling teeth. Okay. It wasn't that easy. And anybody who thinks it was would just really, no, this man was tight-lipped and all that. But you know what? I talk a lot and I love people and I love them to pieces and he loved me. And, you know, finally it came to a point where we were so concerned. We actually read Julius Caesar about regicide. We knew that Kennedy was in great danger. And it's just, we're talking about stuff like that. And we came across Portia and Brutus. Now, Brutus went on, as you know, to kill, it was his foster father. He went on to kill someone that close to him, Julius Caesar. And when Caesar saw it, he said, "Et tu, Brutus, you also, Brutus?" And then he gave up, tried to fight for his life, and he just gave up. But here's the thing, he had told, he didn't tell Portia. Portia's his wife, and she actually struck a knife into her thigh. She was so upset that he would not confide in her, okay? And in the end, even though he said he would, he didn't tell her that he was going to kill, Caesar. She killed herself because he didn't trust her. And when Lee said at one point, "I cannot tell you anymore, it's too dangerous for you, I just can't. I promised I would, but I can't." I said, "What am I? Am I just Portia?" And I was so upset, I bit my lip. He got up and he said, "The women in my life, damn the women in my life." And he didn't know what to do. He didn't want me to know because it would be so dangerous for me. And he walked out, and that's why I bit my lip, because I was just to myself, I will never speak. I would never speak. So you got to understand how much emotion was in this for me and for him. And when we finally came back, he said, "Oh my God, Judy, you've got blood all over your mouth." I still have a scar, of course. And then that broke the ice, you see, for many intimacies. Okay.
Why was Lee so concerned about you only working 2 hours every morning at the airline
That's
drive?
what I was talking about, Royal Castle.
Yeah.
He was so concerned because he thought it may be a courier for Bobby Kennedy's surveillance team. But this showed me, when he finally brought that up later, that he had a connection with, how would he know about Bobby Kennedy's surveillance team unless he knew something about Bobby Kennedy? So that was my first. And then another time at Bannister, it happened again. And the third time it happened with Spring Hill, when he told me Bobby Kennedy sent down a Jesuit priest to the Spring Hill College thing. And there's a lot of story behind that. The point is, at least 3 times I was made aware that Bobby Kennedy was aware of Lee Oswald in some essence, in some way.
But what was the significance? He wanted you to limit it to 2 hours in the morning, right?
Oh, well, the point is I only had, I was waiting for the doctors to come back. And because they were out of town, and when I came, I thought I was going to steak dinners. I'm going to treat you great, I was eating beans because they weren't there. And I only brought $42 with me. And they had set aside. I came, you see, our school got out early compared to, we went on the trimester system for a while at University of Florida. Well, they didn't know that in Louisiana. And so when Oxner asked me to come at the end of school, he meant weeks later. So I came early because I didn't know either. And they weren't there, they were gone. And when I called Oxford Clinic, they said, "Well, who are you?" I still had to fill out the forms for the internship and everything that was promised to me. So
You wanted to respond to a critic challenging you, saying that Robert Baker, your husband, wouldn't be out selling encyclopedias until 10:30 p.m.
Yeah, because you'll find out, it says in the book that we had to get back before Robert Baker got back. In the end, this man who could sell nothing, and he couldn't sell a diamond, okay, to a thief. And but anyway, he's tried to learn how to do encyclopedias, so he was practicing a lot. But they were bringing him around to sell color encyclopedias. He had memorized a spiel, so he'd get there he'd leave about 2 p.m, and he'd follow them around to see how they made their. Make an appointment with the lady of the house when Daddy gets home. It's only when the man gets back to the house, you're going to have the appointment. It's going to be like 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock at night. But then if, say it's an 8 o'clock appointment, it takes a couple of hours. And then they would take him back to the office and say, you did this right, or you did that right, because they're training him. He wasn't getting home till 10:30. It was perfect for us because we had to make that trip to Clinton and Jackson. And this was to Jackson, to the Jackson Hospital, I should say, mental hospital. And when he left at 2, we had just enough time to get all the way down there and get all the way back before he'd get home at 10:30. We got back at 10 and we were scared to death that he would beat us, because one time he did get home earlier. That's the point behind all that. So Robert Baker could work until 10:30. And some people said, nobody works selling encyclopedias, to 10:30. Well, if they're in training and they're getting these evening appointments, that's how come that happened.
For those who might say, well, what would make you so valuable to Alton Oxner? What qualifications and skills did make you so appealing?
Okay, why in the world did Alton Oxner want me in New Orleans? I mean, first of all, I'm not a doctor. I wasn't a doctor then. I mean, I was on training, but I was relatively unknown as far as untraceable goes. Yet I had been at Roswell Park Institute, Memorial Institute, working in Dr. George Moore's own lab. Now, George Moore at that time was in charge of between 8,000 and 15,000 people, and I am in his own personal lab with only 3 people. I was cutting edge. I learned cutting edge research right that whole summer, and he invented the 1640. It's the RPMI 1640 formula, and this formula could grow cancer cells faster than anything on Earth. Certain kinds of ones that we were interested in cancer. Okay, and it's so important because I memorized it. It is a lengthy formula, and I memorized it, okay? So when we're talking about less than a year and a half later, about a year and a half later, all right, I am now invited to come to New Orleans. I have the formula, and nobody's got it unless you're right there in his Dr. Moore's private lab and learned it and worked with it. So there are 2 elements of that RPMI 1640. 1640 is 1,640 attempts to get the right one, okay? So RPMI 1640, we're in there at about RPMI 1600 or so. It's a really great formula. And I actually helped improve it in 2 areas. And one is fetal calf serum. Okay, so we had that going on. And then the other is that I invented while at the University of Florida. It's under a special license that was available at that time. Even though I was undergrad, I was working with some doctors in the lab, and I was able to get my hands on radioactive pellets and material like that. And I was able to learn how to tag red blood cells and other kinds of, and then cancer cells, human cancer cells, and they could be tagged throughout the system. And if the system gets rid of them within a certain period of time, that means your body has been able to kill them. But if before 72 hours is between 48 hours and 72 hours, if you can still trace it, that's what I was doing. It means the body wasn't able to get rid of it. And that meant they're vulnerable to cancer. Now, that's the point that we used out at the hospital. Now, who did we use? We used terminal cancer patients. We didn't use people who didn't have cancer, of course. We injected a different kind of cancer in them so we could trace that different kind of cancer cell. Well, nobody had done that. In fact, it took 40 years before they started doing the same thing that I was doing at the University of Florida. But I got kicked out, because I objected to unethical experiments that were going on prisoners. And my cancer research was over just like that. Okay.
What was CHUR at the University of Florida?
CHUR is it's a committee for the human use of radiation. Okay. And it ended with the Kennedy assassination suddenly. I've always wondered about that. It started the same month I came to the University of Florida in February 1962. And they had fights. They would have the AEC would let the universities fight for the rights to have, these many licenses. And the University of Florida had a lot of influence because of Senator Smathers. That was his alma mater. He said, this has got to stop. Let the University of Florida, instead of all the departments trying to fight for this, let them put up a thing where the license is shared with as many departments as needed in our university. And since I worked for several departments, I worked for the Department of Nutrition, and I worked for another department that had to do with radiation. Of course, I had access then, even though because this license was so general, even I could use radioactive materials. Boy, at the Kennedy administration, bingo, they stopped that. They didn't want anybody looking in that direction. So the tour was over right after the assassination in February. So it lasted a year. It's not very long, 61, 62, it was 62 to 63.
With our time limits, I'm going to jump to
Yeah.
Louisiana. Explain the woman in the car and Dr. Howard Platzman's essay about Joan Mellon's
Okay,
pressuring
Joan Mellon
witnesses.
says that I'm not the woman in the car. First, she said that was somebody else. And then when that didn't pan out, she found another name to put in, and it was somebody else. It couldn't be me because she doesn't want me in there in the car. Okay. And I have records and stuff like that on this. But the problem is that Miss Mellon has gone and influenced witnesses. Chris Milligan, can someone just grab him real quick, just like for a minute? We only have a minute left here. Can somebody ask him to come over here quickly from his room? No, nobody's jumping. Okay. Well, anyway, Chris will tell you. No, it's okay. Chris Milligan was present when Mary Morgan, and you can go and talk to him about this. Mary Morgan saw a woman in the car. Reeves Morgan was the person that he was talking to, okay, in Jackson right after we left the hospital, and we stopped there. What's important about this, what's so important about this is that Mary Morgan saw a woman in the car, but she kind of forgot that. But we met her just a few years ago, all right, I think 2016. And what happened at that point is I told her all that happened. She said, okay, what color was our house? And I told her it was white, even though all the pictures now show it dark brown, you know. And she asked me what direction the car was parked in. I told her, because she remembered the car. She asked what color the car was. I told her. She asked what the neighbors across the street, where their house looked like. Said there weren't any. It was all field. All these kinds of things that nobody would know. One after another, I told her, and she said, you had to be the girl in the car. The last thing she asked me is, I came out, she said, and I went over to the right. What was I doing? I said, we went towards some big reddish object. She said, that was my rusty freezer. She went out there to get something out of the freezer. So I could remember all these things, you see. And what's important about this, of course, is that Mary said that her brother is not very bright. I don't want to say it like that. What's the word? Influenced, easily influenced. And Joan Mellon said he went up a tree and watched Lee Oswald get into a black Cadillac that pulled up and go away. There was no woman in a car. But Mary Morgan has never forgotten that there was the car. And what did they do? Leave the car behind forever in Mr. Morgan's yard? Okay, so we're going to have more questions like that later. I hope you enjoyed that.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to bring up our next speaker, our hostess for this event, Judyth Vary Baker, who will be speaking on what Oliver Stone's masterpiece film couldn't talk about, with laureate Garret Tenhave Chapman, What Really Happened in Mexico City. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Judyth Vary Baker. Judyth, where are you? Uh-oh, she disappeared on us. That is a faux pas. As an MC, you want to make sure your person's here before you introduce them. So give me some demerits. All right, well, let's fill some time. So anyway, I know you're here because you want to hear what Judy has to share with us. You know, I first became aware of her in, I believe it was 2014. I read her book and I was so taken with it. I read that book in a day and a half, me and Lee. I'm not a strong reader. I've shared the story before, but I was so taken by what I was reading, I couldn't put it down until finally my eyes gave out. And as soon as I woke up the next morning, I was right back on it. And I finished that book in a day and a half. And I was so taken by that, I wanted to reach out to her and thank her. And I did everything in the world I could to finally reach out and connect with her and tell her how much I appreciated her courage and the information that she shared with us is help us have a greater picture of what really happened and what did not happen on November 22nd, 1963. And I finally did make contact with her. And it's led to an association we've been able to work together, since 2014. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of things with her and for her. And it was really interesting. When I first reached out, my biggest dream at that point would, if I could have spent 15 minutes alone talking with Judyth Vary Baker, I could die a very happy man. And what I can say, I've had a lot more than 15 minutes. And I never dreamed that I'd be standing up here addressing you, working with you, working for you. But here I am, and it's living the JFK assassination buff's dream come true. All right, Mark, you've got something today, so let's go and fill some time here. Let me give you the microphone. Though. Mark. All right.
Well, this is fun. So we did a little art contest, just with my office people to go, how can we do something that will kind of help change the images of our history. Anyway, so we had a contest. We had it open on Facebook and stuff like that. And we ended up picking 2 winners. But what I'm saying here is, see the one that's down there, the devil's chessboard? See that one? Okay. If I'm thinking that we should have if anybody is interested in that, write your name on a piece of paper and we'll do a drawing, and whoever gets it, gets it. Okay? So who can collect those? Bertie, will you take care of that? Just, yeah. If you're interested in winning it, it's not paying for it, it's winning it. Okay, if you're interested in winning it, give Bertie that thing. We'll put it in a hat and we'll do a drawing, and whoever gets it gets to go home with it.
Wow.
Okay? Okay.
Wow.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Judyth Baker and Garret Tenhave Chapman. Give them a round of applause, please.
Are these on? Mine is. I think one is off.
Hello?
No.
Hello? Oh, my
Now
God.
it's on. Judyth, we're going to pick up, and as the schedule says, we're going to focus on Mexico City, although as time permits, we have plenty of other things to get to. But before I ask you Mexico City questions, there's 2 general questions about you and Lee that I think would give everybody an opportunity to know more about your relationship.
Okay.
Can you tell them the things that you and Lee had in common?
What did we have in common? He was a man and I was a woman. We're both young. We're both in miserable, unhappy marriages that were, we thought were going to work out really well. And like my husband married me, and the next day he left and he wouldn't tell me where he was going for weeks. Had no idea where he went. Meanwhile, I got kicked out of a whorehouse, was homeless, and wondered what was going to happen to me. And Lee Oswald came to the rescue. Also, when I was walking down the street with Lee, one time a sailor jumped out with a knife. I think my former husband would have said, "Defend me, Judy." But in this case, it was Lee Oswald who slowly pulled out the wallet that he demanded. And he's 5'9", which is ordinary. This guy was huge. So he says, "Have your wallet or I'm going to cut your face." Like that. And Lee said so calmly, he said, "You may cut my face, but not before I get your balls." And he went like that when there was he had a switchblade. By the way, he owned 2 switchblades when I knew him. That thing came out like that. He went like that, and that guy ran. So then we jumped into the Godfather's car. You can read about in my book how that happened. This is cool. He jumped in. He used his elbow like that to get the. He didn't use his hand. He banged like that with his elbow. That's how fast he could think to lock the door with his elbow. So he went great, like that. And then he's sitting there and he starts to shake a little. And we're like this, and he said, "We're going to have to get out of here because he may come back with some friend." He was a sailor, you know. He was all hyped up. Maybe the guy ran out of money and had been gambling and desperately needed some money or somewhere where somebody else could cut him up, whatever it was. I said, "Well, Lee, you're shaking, you know." And he said, "Yes, I was afraid." He said, "But that will pass, you know. That's because I was afraid, but that will pass." And another thing that Lee told me that really got to me is he said, "Don't confuse pain with discomfort." He said, "You can take a lot of discomfort before you should call it pain." And I think that kind of attitude was with him. He was not a complainer. if he complained to the police, when he said, you've got me in a t-shirt and these teenagers here that you have with teenagers and they're all wearing shirts. He said, that's not fair. And he wasn't right, wasn't he? Okay, so the lineups are horrible. Okay, anyway.
Dr. John Delane Williams wrote a book, Lee Harvey Oswald, Lyndon Johnson, and the JFK assassination. He's a college mathematics professor, and he discussed the odds of you and Lee coming together with all the things that happened. Here's a reminder of some of the points.
I don't need that.
Okay, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, first of all, to finish the things we had in common besides his rescuing me and I'm asking him to, is we loved horses, horseback riding and stuff. He liked biology was his favorite class, he said, in school. And a lot of people don't understand how interested he was in all that. He wanted to be a writer, and so of course did I. And he also wanted to see the world, but he wanted to work with people. And I think he would have made a great sociologist. He had read Margaret Mead. And so he said, you know, we could live in some beautiful tropic place where there's peace and raise our babies. He said, we won't have to have diapers. We'll wash them off in the waves of the ocean. So he had a very romantic streak in him. And I can see where he could sweep away a woman right away if he knew exactly what to say to her, because Sylvia Duran in Mexico City, okay, she finally came out and told a good friend of hers who happened to be a friend of FBI and CIA informant. She said, I liked him from the beginning. And then she admitted she slept with him. I mean, she couldn't know him more than 2 days and she was in bed with him, and I can understand how. Okay.
Did you want to comment any further on Williams' book?
Of course, now Williams, and all that, yes. What it is, Dr. John Delane Williams was really interested. He met one of my witnesses, and her name is Kelly Thomas. And Thomas is living there, and he had her gather together all kinds of information that he needed. And this was from the newspapers. Now, if you're going to get a job and you want to get a job in New Orleans, I would not go for a job, for example, that said they want somebody to lay concrete, or to teach driving lessons or what. So he sorted through all of the kinds of ads that somebody my age would come to New Orleans might be interested in. And you have to understand actually that the number of ads is not as important as how long they run and whether it'd be interesting, who would apply for them. And he did the same for Lee Oswald. It ended up that because most of these ads run a week or 2 weeks, that there are quite a few duplicates and all that, but nevertheless, a lot of ads. He did a calculation and he realized that the chances of our applying for the same kind of job at Riley's the same day, that was one factor. We both applied on the 9th, of May for a job at Riley's. Of all the people and all the jobs that were being advertised all over, in the newspapers. And for that, remember, we were there from he was there from the 25th and I was there from the 26th. So we have newspaper ads running that you could apply for employment from at least the 26th on. I got there the 19th. So I had all this time to apply for a job. 19th, 20th, 20th, okay, all the way down, all the way into May. And I only applied for 2 jobs. One was this tiny little Royal Castle thing, but the one I got, the job that really counts, it's on the record and all that, I applied for only 1 job and got it, and so did he. We applied only on May 9th, and we got the job on May and started May 10th, Friday, May 10th. What's important about that? So we started the same day at the same sub company, not at Riley's. It was at Standard. There are only 2 places mentioning that Lee Oswald started work at Standard, not Riley, in the whole Warren Commission, all those 26 volumes. But and I have a check stub showing I worked at Standard just like he did for 1 week. So after 1 week, I go and I transfer over to Riley's, and so does he. You can see he transferred because he checked in twice. He clocked in once for Standard, and he clocked in again for Riley. You can see that on his clock in and clock out records. Same day. Then we're over there, and so this is part of the statistics. Now, Dr. Williams, the statistician, is adding all these up. Okay, they apply the same day, they're both at A1 employment agency too, same agency. Same day to get interviewed, same day hired, same day at Standard, same day we moved from Standard to Riley's. And then on July 19th, Lee is fired. And that day, that same day, they put an ad out to replace me. It's right there in the paper, okay? So it comes out the 20th saying that they need a new executive secretary for Mr. Monahan, okay? So that's on the 19th. Now, because I was working only for minimum wage for Riley, because I wasn't a real, they forgot to change the wage scale, and the first batch of people they got in there, they didn't want to have such a low pay, so they had to put the ad in again. And this time it says good pay, okay? So now they finally have someone to train. So by August 9th, I'm still there, but we're training my replacement. I was supposed to be there another week at least because she needed training. Unfortunately, August 9th is the day that I was talking about those colored flyers, Well, as a scientist, I saw the flyers at the top. They were not, the margin at the top was too big compared to the bottom. So I go to the paper cutter and I start cutting off some of the top of all these flyers. So they landed in the wastebasket and I crumpled up a couple that didn't work right. Now, why did I have these? Because Lee Oswald knew there was going to be a planned altercation and they're going to stomp on his flyers and throw them down. And he knows he's going to have another demonstration at the Trade Mart. So he had me hold on to some. Now, the thing is so I brought them and I gave them to Dean Andrews. He was just down the street watching the whole thing. He wasn't very far away at all. Okay, right in front of his own office. And I handed it to him. Boy, the sweaty hands he had. But anyway, he sweat like a pig. He was great. He was a really nice guy, but he's great big. He was pretty fat. He had like 8 kids and all, like good Catholic, and everything. So anyway, Dean took them, put them in his right away in a valise he had, and he handed those later to Carlos Quiroga, who took them back to Lee. And so he'd have them again. And what's the official story? That he took a pamphlet, over there to confront Lee. What's this all about? Who are you? And blah, blah, blah. That's the real truth, because Mrs. Garner, who was she was the manager of the 4907, 4905, and the other apartments that were there. She saw him come with a stack she said was about 6 inches high, like that. Well, actually, it was about that high. It was about, I guess he had about 450 left, okay? He actually had 1,000 altogether. So there you are. He told the FPCC that Lee did, that he distributed thousands of flyers. Okay, he only printed 1,000 that I know of. So anyway, here I am seen with Lee, unfortunately, because Mr. Monahan took the new secretary, because I'd been training her so long, she missed lunch, took her out for a late lunch, and they spotted me as I passed by Lee and said something to him. And so when I got back at around, at 4:30, Lee was arrested, or at least at 4:30, it was announced to me that he had been arrested. He probably got arrested 3:30, I think. And I was seen with him. He said, we have to get rid of you. So I was fired, and I have this check stub where they cut for me at 4:30, okay? I was fired on August 9th, the same day that Lee was arrested. So that's another factor to put in there on top of the others. Then what? I came in April to New Orleans for the first time. Lee came in April to New Orleans for the first time in a decade. When I left New Orleans in September, Lee also left New Orleans in September. Neither of us ever to return. I didn't return for years and years. And of course, he died. So these are some of the things we had in common. He did some other calculations, and he came up with, it was more than 1,000,000 to 1 that any of that could have happened by chance. Okay. And a 99% chance that we were, well, I'll put it this way, knew each other well. Okay. Okay. And these are statistics. This guy is really good in statistics. So that's what that's about. I know I spent a lot of time on this background.
And for those interested, the book is Lee Harvey Oswald, Lyndon Johnson, and the JFK Assassination by Dr. John Delane Williams. Let's turn to Mexico City.
Yes.
There were Oswald sightings in Austin and Dallas at the same time that Lee was supposed to be on a bus to Houston, which would then go on to Mexico City. Can you explain?
Yes. Lee Oswald has a very important mission to accomplish, but he's not supposed to have the whole world know about it. Remember, he was out there handing out flyers and all, and he looks like pro-Castro, but then he sits on his porch and reads for weeks. He's waiting for the prisoner to die. And he has to stay low now, because if he's going to go to Mexico City with something to kill Castro, all right, he doesn't want to be tailed or followed by, even if the CIA or FBI say they weren't involved, he's got to make sure that there's no way that people are interested in him anymore. So silence of the lambs. I mean, he is quiet now, all right? And what he does is he writes letters to the Communist Party. He writes to, I think, to the worker. He writes to the FPCC and says, I'm going to be in Baltimore. To another one, he says, I'm going to Philadelphia. To Ruth Payne, he says, I'm going to be looking for work in Houston. Okay. So he puts out these letters that tells these things that he's going to be anywhere but Mexico City. And then on top of that, they make sure in the morning, when he leaves on the, I think it's the 24th, I told you about Mrs. Gardner. Well, we have, his name is Rogers, Eric Rogers, had been moved into 4907. Lee always used 4907 as his address, but he actually had somebody living there to take mail for him. And if anybody came inquiring, it kept them away from his family who were in 4905. So the guy living in 4907, Eric Rogers, says, yeah, I saw him leave with a couple suitcases and he had goggles. There's a story about the goggles. So Lee flew heck of a lot more than people knew. All right, but that's what the goggles, they were flight goggles. So anyway, he saw him leave. And yet, so he was supposed to have left on a bus, all right, like on the 25th. But yet somebody picked up his warrant. This warrant is for his $33 warrant that he was getting for unemployment from Texas. Gee, here he has been living in New Orleans. He gets unemployment checks from Texas. I don't know how he manages, but he said, I don't have to tell you how that happened. He said, okay, so somebody picked up that check. Well, it was him, because he spent the night at International House, and he had a meeting there with Hugh Ward. He had a meeting with the ambassador from Lyndon Johnson. His name was LaCourque. This is Tommy Corcoran's, I guess you'd call him a lawyer or somebody working with him. And he was given a material and everything. So they have a reason to have him on the plane to drop stuff off. It just, I guess, in case anybody's wondering, you know, not just, he's making appearances in different cities. So you'll never guess that he was actually, it looks like he's on the road on the way to Houston in a bus, although nobody saw him. You see, there are no witnesses that saw him, but he actually put his luggage on this bus even. Okay, so by the way, he bought that bus ticket on it. It's interesting because right after we got back from Clinton and Jackson, from the Jackson Hospital, all right, he went over before midnight and bought a bus ticket to go to Mexico City. It goes all the way to Laredo, and then from there we go. What is that about? He has to buy that bus ticket as early as he can, as far away as he can from the death of that prisoner. So you don't have him buy a ticket the minute that the prisoner is dead, and you don't want anybody to link that one thing with the other. So that's the bottom line there. Now, the bottom line actually is it looks like Lee Oswald never went to Mexico City, so it can be, everybody can deny that it ever happened. They had a de Havilland Dove set up there at Houma, Louisiana, and Hugh Ward and Lee were driven there, okay? And they had a Cuban pilot was there, but Hugh was there also to do most of the flying. And he gets on the plane and they take off. And about the time they take off, they find out from a ham radio operator that Alexander Rourke and Jeffrey Sullivan have been shot down. shot down. I was supposed to be picked up so I could meet Lee in Mexico from Rourke and Sullivan. So Lee had to call me at the border and say, you're right, it has been shot down. We don't know what I mean, it's still a rumor, but we believe that something's happened to them. They're dead, probably. All right, we know there were 11 days later, Jerry Hemming goes out with a search party trying to find the downed plane. I had bought a pistol because I was afraid if these two picked me up, if they were bad guys, that maybe I would have to defend myself because I didn't want to be kicked out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. Understand? Okay. So, okay, so he shows up and he's in Austin. He shows up and he is in Dallas with Sylvia Odia. That really happened. And then he is flown to, as you heard, Edward T. Haslam told you. That's when they land in Sugar Land and all that. Later, we have David Ferry during the time of the assassination. He shows up. Where's he go? Drives right through Sugar Land, okay, on the way, stops right at this Winterland skating rink and is on the phone half the night there. That's only 25 minutes away from Sugar Land. If Lee would have gotten out there, he would have been flown from Redwood Airport, is what we believe. He would have been flown over to Alief Field, from there picked up, taken to Sugar Land, the Hull Field, and flown to Mexico and out of there. But of course, he never made the plane. It looks to me like the person that was supposed to meet him at the Texas Theater didn't show up, and that's how they trapped him. Okay.
You mentioned something I want to follow up on.
Yes.
The why question. Why did, according to what Lee told you, why did the CIA go to the trouble of flying him to Austin and Dallas?
Okay, there are several things. Lee was really impressed that they go to all this trouble to make sure so we were sure that all this was legitimate, that we was really sending down a bioweapon. Later, in hindsight, we realized if they send him down there and then they didn't, nobody picked it up, but they had got him down there, didn't they? And what is he going to do now? And he has a living biological weapon. It only has a shelf day of so many days. It's living stuff. And if he can't find, he had backup list. If he can't find somebody on that backup list to take it, what is he going to do? He has to at least show interest in trying to get it to Cuba. That means he now believes, and we did believe, that he was given a dummy and that they've never let the Cubans have this stuff. But we were young and we didn't think about it at the right time. We thought about it as afterwards. So could you repeat what you were saying there so I can pull that up again?
According to what he told you,
Yeah.
why did the CIA fly him Austin, Dallas?
Yeah. So here's what when we look back, because we talked on the phone about this, he believed he was being treated really special. They're helping him to hide the fact that he's going to Mexico City. And they made him feel important. And like what he was doing was very important. Okay. And now, of course, we believe that they did that on purpose to make him feel important so he would trust them, you see. So there's so many reasons why these trips happen, but these are the real reasons why he was cited in all these places. So now he calls me, so I can go on. Yeah.
This next question might not sound like it's related to Mexico City, but I think it is. Who returned Lee Oswald's New Orleans library books before they were overdue, and
That's
why?
right. They act like Lee was friendless. Well, Susie Hanover knew, as you can know from my book, how close she got to Lee and to me, and she was just like a mommy to us. And so many, except we're laying in bed naked together, and she came in once, and we were covered up. Don't get me wrong, but she realized that we were more than friends, and she just thought it was wonderful. She was so sweet about the whole thing. Anyway, Susie, the books actually were left at my apartment, and Susie took them back before they were due. That's all. But they're saying, who did this? I mean, this man had no friends. You know, how do these library books get back, to the library on time? Well, that's because he wasn't friendless. Okay. Susie got him back for him so they wouldn't be late. Okay.
I have a question about the Russian embassy. Why was Oswald impersonated as having arrangements with the Russian embassy?
Okay, now imagine CIA and the powers that be apparently wanted to get Lee Oswald down there, and they wanted to make sure that he would be anxious enough or worried enough to misbehave himself in some way due to the pressure on him having a biological weapon. Imagine, he gets off the bus. The first thing he does is goes to a souvenir shop, even before he registers at anywhere. As far as I'm aware, he went right away to the souvenir shop and tried to, he set it down, he waits. Nobody comes by to pick it up. Now, I want to tell you something. These drops, they happen right away. You don't wait 3 hours, 4 hours. Nobody shows up in a little. You cannot stand there. I mean, you're vulnerable. So he had to pick it up again, of course, after a while and leave. And he contacted his handler, found out his handler had left town about 6 days earlier without telling him. Now that's right away, he's feeling really left out to hang in the wind, okay? It's horrible what's happened. But there could be another reason. Maybe this other guy was being followed and he just couldn't do it. There's always a backup. So he tried to check with a cutout because that cutout was cut out, somebody in between, okay, was in contact with Hunt. I didn't know that St. John Hunt and I talked together about different places. He said, oh yeah, his father could be sent anywhere at any time real fast, and all that. There's no way to figure out where Hunt might have been. He would always deny, but he was supposed to be in Mexico City at that time. At least Lee thought he was. And he would try and get verification for him. Where do I go next? Should I go on to plan B? So he tried again. The part of plan B is there were doctors convention, and there had been doctors identified that were on this list that they would have sent someone, a representative. But he had to make sure that the doctor knew to send someone to pick this stuff up. So he's got some time, all right, still left. The problem he faces now is to locate one of these students and they are all at university. So you find these reports of Lee Oswald for some reason hanging around with these beatnik type students from the university. That's why that happened. And there's a lot of blanks I can fill in. We don't have a lot of time here, but privately I will tell you the whole story. So can you refresh me on what you just said about Mexico City and what the problems there are with who he's trying to contact? Because he is not supposed to just throw it away. It's valuable. There's still some time. He has a problem. He's got to show that he cares. So one of the things that got in his head was to go and ask for a transit visa and pretend he wants to go on to the USSR from there. Of course, he had many ways to fly to Russia without going through Cuba, but he's asking for why? Because he can hand this stuff off, you see, to a contact while he is in Cuba in the transit on the way to the USSR. It's just like you take a plane, you're there for a couple of days, and then you get another plane out. It's transit. Well, they said it's weeks before you can get that done, blah, 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 and all that. Well, he knows someone who can get that done. And I don't know whether the next question, does that mention anything about that?
Not about that, but go ahead if you want to.
Okay. The name of the man that he knew that he should contact, this man had in 2017 had over 500 pages released about him. Now, why in the heck did the CIA release so many pages about a man called Raul Aparicio? And have you ever heard about him in all the saga of Mexico City? Even some of the people I talked to that are supposed to be almost like experts, researchers that who don't, some of them believe that Lee was there and others don't, okay, because of all this mess. They knew nothing about Aparicio. When Oliver Stone was interviewing me, and Jim DiEugenio was there and others, and I brought Aparicio, and they were all blanks. And yet this is one of the most important people. Why would the CIA have over 500 pages on him and release them as connected to Oswald, okay, to the assassination? And by the way, they released everything but 1963 about Aparicio. No, with all those pages, we've got 62 and then we've got 64 on the other side, and 63 is blank. What in the heck is going on? Aparicio, Raul Aparicio was in charge of all kinds of cultural events and everything. He was over at the Cuban embassy. not at the Cuban consulate. The Cuban embassy and the Cuban consulate were right on the same compound, all right? The consulate was where you had to go and get your transit visa and stuff. The embassy over here is where you could go to the big shots and make sure you get your transit visa if they were going to cooperate with you over here. Lee goes over to the embassy and goes to Raul Aparicio's office. How interesting that this is the time the CIA bugs with a bug that they know can be easily found, but for one day they have this place bugged the very day that Lee goes there, all right? And it's already the telephone is bugged, so we know that Aparicio, who had diabetes and he had a shunt, and that's how I found out what his name was, as Lee mentioned, he had a shunt. That is to drain off fluids and stuff, you know. And he went to the hospital because he had real trouble with his diabetes. And the only person there was Teresa Proenza, and that was his attaché, the person working with him. Teresa Proenza's very good friend was Sylvia Duran over in the Cuban consulate. She was the one in charge of getting transit visas, okay, apply applications, processed then for, excuse me, that, I don't know why that distracts me so much.
Teresa's role.
So Teresa herself was still there. Teresa told all the people, all the bad guys, when they asked, oh, all he did is ask me the direction to the office. I didn't talk to him. I don't know English, blah, 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 blah. As a matter of fact, she was in charge of the office when he wasn't there. So she tried to protect herself. Alas, it was too late. The fact that Lee Oswald, that she reported, talked to her in very reasonable tones. He just asked where Aparicio was and wanted to know when he would be back. It wasn't like the version that was released that Lee Oswald was screaming and yelling inside the embassy that he wanted to kill Kennedy and all this stuff. All right, it was planted later. But the trouble is, you had Proenza there who said he was rational and he was, you know, just asking questions. What's going on here? They got to get rid of Proenza, and they do. In the operation that they used, worked with another official that was in the Cuban government there in Mexico. Anyway, they got rid of her and this other official and some others by planting fake evidence that they were really infiltrating against Castro. They got arrested. They were sent back to Cuba. They were arrested, went to prison, and got released on house arrest. That's how they got rid of Teresa Proenza. So all you have left is this rumor that Lee Oswald was screaming around in the embassy that he's interested in killing Castro. He wants to kill Kennedy. He just wants to kill everybody. You know, I mean, that's what you got left. Meanwhile, over in the Cuban consulate, at the same time, Lee is trying to contact Raul Aparicio. Now, the background of Aparicio, I said, in charge of cultural events. If you had a traveling, you're a photographer for a special magazine, let's say it was Look or something, or if you were somebody and you had you're with an opera and the opera wants to get in, but somebody's left behind. In an emergency, Aparicio could get you in overnight into Cuba so you could be with your troupe, or you could, or you're a doctor and has to give a lecture and you missed your plane or whatever it was. He knew all the doctors also. He had a list of them because he was trying to bring doctors into Cuba. And if anybody had the list of these doctors that Lee Oswald needed, Aparicio had them, okay? Now, that's the kind of thing the CIA doesn't want anybody to know about. They don't want you to know about biological weapons or what. They will tell you that there were exploding cigars. They won't tell you the cigars that had botulism in them. They'll tell you about the silly things that didn't work, that, you know, they wanted Castro's beard to fall out by using thallium. They do stuff like that. But, you know, the very serious things, Castro said over 600 attempts were made by the CIA and other enemies against Castro that they thwarted. And he still was around. They never could get him. But this biological weapon was one that really invested a lot of work in. And at the last minute, it seems called it off and used it to frame Lee. It's just horrible. It takes a long time to explain it all. I've got all the details for anybody who wants to know, because he was furious. As I say, he went to find Raul. Raul wasn't there. Raul could have gotten him in there overnight. Now he has a problem. again, something's happening while he is over at the embassy. At the same time, he's at the embassy, and it's a Saturday, and the consulate is supposed to be closed now. But somebody's over there pretending to be Lee Oswald and speaks horrible Russian and says that he has met with Kostikov. Kostikov over in the Russian embassy, okay, was a KGB guy who was connected with assassination programs they had. So that would look really good to link Lee Oswald with Kostikov. Half the time the CIA links him over there with Kostikov and says, yes, this is the guy that did it. You know, Lee Oswald killed Kennedy, and Kostikov, you know, the Russians decided not to go along with it, but Kostikov, he approached him because Kostikov is assassin, you know, and all this stuff. It just wasn't like that at all. He did not make that call. That was made by somebody speaking atrocious Russian who had a Spanish accent. I could go on and on about when they want him to be linked, like Bob Bauer, CIA, and this tracking Oswald said, oh yeah, he was there. He knows darn well that they checked the voice. They had the actual records, audio recordings, and they know darn well that that was sent up to Dallas, and they compared that with Lee's voice on those records that you saw that Jeffrey Holmes brought in. They had Lee's voice, and there's no similarity whatsoever. They knew that, how Hoover knew that was not the voice and told Lyndon Johnson so. All right, so that was not him. But now, depending on whether we like Russia or not, that's when they bring it in. If we don't like Russia, that's when they say that Lee was conspiring and talked to Kostikov and that he was there in Mexico City. If we're trying to get along with Russia, they say he was not in Mexico City, okay? And that was not his voice, and so on. So they've got it either way, you know, whatever they want that will work for them. Hope you understand that Aparicio would have been able to get Lee into transit. So he goes back finally, and he talks back to the Cuban consulate. And I want to tell you, by the way, she said, you've got to have photographs. If Lee originally intended to go to the Cuban consulate and get into Cuba, he would have had those photos ready. This guy traveled all over. He knows he has to have photos in order to have them for passports. He's got to have them for visas. He didn't have any photos because he originally intended to be with me and stay in Mexico. All right. Only we weren't going to stay in Mexico City at that time. We were too scared. Okay, we were going to be way in the boondocks somewhere. There are lots and lots of things that they've said online about me, and they've made a lot of stuff up, like that we plan to go to Cancun. Well, guess what? Cancun did exist, and it just wasn't a big city at that time, but it was the island of Cancun. Okay, not Cancun, not a big city or anything like that. And why? We had seen Willis Andrews, who was an archaeologist who was working for Tulane and had connections with the CIA, had a big display up in August. It had all the maps, it had everything. It showed, and when he left, they left water and their leftover food. It was just a month earlier, for heaven's sakes. All right, they left all the supplies there in a nice hacienda that they had, and with coconut palms around it and everything, right there, and not a soul knew about it except anybody who saw the display in Tulane. In the Tulane Latin American Library. And that's where we saw this, and wow, this is where we can go. It says you can land a plane right there, no problem, right there on the beach. It's just like a landing strip. From there, we'll go to Chichen Itza and climb Chichen Itza, which I wanted to do. And we're going to get married maybe in Merida. Maybe then we'll go hide in the Cayman Islands if things are bad. So all this was there. It was never set in stone. What we would do was flexible according to what would happen. So Willis Andrews, we have all the records on it. I found them in Cancun in Spanish, and that all this happened. And now we've put that online and everything. So that's the background for that. And I hope you understand that here is Lee going back to the Cuban consulate. He says to ask you and the Merida, who was there, Marable. Okay, he says, I have got to get there. I only have 3 days. And they're saying, what do you mean 3 days? After all, you've got 2 weeks on your visa. He said, I've only got 3 days. The reason he said that is because that stuff would die. After 3 days, if he didn't get handed off, it would die and it would be no good. So I can tell you many reasons for some of the odd things that he said, that they say, what's the matter with Mr. Oswald, you know? All right, that's what's behind that. The other part of that, and I think it's important, is that he went to the Russian embassy and he laid a gun there on the table. And he says, the FBI is after me and I have a terrible problem and you guys got to help me to get to Cuba. And they took the gun away, they took the bullets out and everything like that. And they felt like what he did there was just genius. That, remember, he played the Scarlet Pimpernel roles. By making himself look desperate, first of all, it exonerated him with the CIA. They're going to say, well, Oswald's just totally loony here, but he has figured out a way that he can't get to Cuba. So he's going to make it look like he's an idiot, and that's fine. Remember, once before he made himself look like an idiot in the Soviet Union when they were interrogating him, and he's exhausted. He had lost all his blood practically, almost killed himself accidentally. It was supposed to just be staged, and he didn't cut himself that deep, but she was late coming, okay? Remember, this was in Moscow. And he had a big problem there because they were going to send him back. So he was brave enough to slit his wrist. And she was supposed to come, she was a half an hour late. That was really bad for him because he lost a lot of blood. And he kind of passed out. Anyway, he had the door locked. They knocked that. They actually literally kicked down, opened the door, got him out of there, put him in the hospital in the mental ward, I might add, where he didn't stay long because they realized he had all his senses about him. He was very weak, but he finally got out, and then they interrogated him secretly. Everybody claims they didn't interrogate him. Yes, they did. And they made him stand, he said, and if he moved, they hit him. And he just acted a little boy part. I just loved communists. I just loved it, you know. I just think Marx is the most wonderful guy. And, you know, he's acted very stupid that, you know, I just think Lenin was so cute with his mustache. I mean, it's things like that. It just, yeah. So, you know, they let him go and send him to Minsk and gave him a book called The Idiot by Dostoevsky as a gift, The Idiot. And they thought of him as an idiot, you know, but they still watched him all the time, just in case but he was so young, you see. So Lee would play these games. And so here he is now. He knows that he's done everything he can to get the CIA to approve that he's tried to do his best. Now he's got to discredit himself because he can't get in. So he puts the gun out. This is really good because we were planning to be CIA informants for the CIA. And by his telling the Russians, if FBI is after us, that makes him a terrific candidate for an informant, you see. If the FBI is after him and then can give information to the Russians or the communist Cubans, I mean, they're going to say, yeah, this guy, FBI is after him, and he maybe he's an idiot and all that, but he gets around, he's friendly, maybe we ought to listen to his stuff. So he was going to be acting as an informant, and I believe that he did an excellent job of, because they said, first of all, Mirabel and Askew said, out with you. We never want to see your little rotten little face again. Bang, out. You know, because he said, I only got 3 days. You got to help me. You got to help. You know, and he started arguing with them. Well, that was to get him out of there completely. But remember, Lee could really turn on the charm. Because all of a sudden we know that Lee and Sylvia Duran meet. You know, believe this, at Sanborn's. We know she told that to an informant, and also her cousins knew it. She met Lee Oswald for dinner or lunch or whatever it was at Sanborn's. Now, why is that important? The Sanborn's we're talking about was located on the ground floor, but above the Sanborn's restaurant, the floors above, a number of them were with the American Embassy, which bugs everything that's being said in Sanborn's. In other words, he took her to the heart of the American intelligence community and had lunch with her. Sylvia Duran was not just an ordinary person. I told you she had this close relationship with Teresa Proenza, who could have helped to get him into Cuba in the pinch. But he was not available. So he's working on Sylvia. Why? Lee has to make himself look valuable to the CIA. He knows he hasn't been treated right. They were supposed to send him and let him go to college, all kinds of things. They didn't do any of that. He realized that he was disposable. Then Oxer told me and Lee that we were expendable. Now, Lee is not stupid. He realized that as a returned defector, he had very little that he could do after all this. How is he going to be a spy? He can't be a spy. Or what can he do? He's no good to either side. And he understood that. But buried in Mexico and with a new life for us, as informants working for the CIA, or maybe there would be chances that, he would be still valuable. I'm the one that was pro-Castro in New Orleans. So he's looking at this situation, and he's got to make sure that the Soviets see him as someone who's scared of the FBI. That's he lays that gun down. The FBI's after me. You've got to help me get to Russia. He knew darn well they couldn't get him into Russia for another few months or whatever. His visa was going to be processed for a long time. He knew this stuff. So that's the background for all of that. There's a lot more. We have documents to understand. You have to understand one very special thing, why we believe he took a dummy down there. Lee transferred over to a representative from MD Anderson Hospital. They gave him what they said was a fresh supply before that would be 1 day younger than what he had. So he had an extra day of life in that thing. And they switched. That's when we believe the real stuff from New Orleans was given to MD Anderson Hospital. A few years later, you find that someone is suing MD Anderson Hospital employee who said he's going to inject, because he said they threatened to inject or did inject live cancer cells into his body. You have to understand that if you inject live cancer cells into your body, like Dr. Oxer said, you have to inject a pint of it in you from ordinary cancer cells before it's going to hurt you. Your body's going to sift them right out. Not the super cancer, not the biological weapon we developed. Totally different monster, all right? Totally different. And the thing is this man, MD Anderson, said he's going to sue, because he got injected with cancer cells. Obviously, he's working with something that has to be a heck of a lot more powerful than the usual cancer cells. That's on the record. Another thing that came out in 2017, I'd like to see it, and I have the documents for it, is it shows that MD Anderson in October, now understand, at the end of September is when Lee Oswald goes to Mexico City. He switches this off. In October, MD Anderson has a contract with the CIA to work with cancer and radiation, and we looked at and they had a inventory done, and yes, they had all the stuff you need for cryo. When I'm talking about that, deep freezing this stuff, so they have it, and as far as I know, they still have it. This stuff you thought, and it can be used at any time. MD Anderson has or had the stuff. And that's why I say we do not believe they would allow this to get in the hands of the Cubans. But they fooled Lee and me and everybody with all this elaborate, sending him to different cities, making sure looked very important and that they were behind him. Then they dumped him and left him on his own down there. Now Lee is understanding, and he has to act stupid, like, well, I guess you just had to do that to me, They order him back to Dallas when he was supposed to stay. They promised he could stay. Now, when they order him back, he did not want to go back, all right, or anything like that. But he got debriefed. He had to go to YMCA. He was debriefed there. He couldn't go straight to see Marina or anything like that. At the same time, they had to give him an excuse for why that stuff hadn't been picked up. And they told him it was because of Hurricane Flora, that they had to call it off because Castro sent all his medical teams all over the place. They couldn't get Castro in one place to administer this stuff to him. It would be hidden as a DPT shot or as a penicillin shot. All they have to do, now you guys know, or you should know, that if you inject and you're going to give somebody a shot like DPT or anything else, and it goes past the muscle and gets into a bloodstream, you have to check that needle and pull it out a little to see if there's blood in it. If it is, you discard it because you want an intermuscular injection. Now, in this case, they would make sure they would get an intravenous injection. You have Jack Ruby saying, I was injected with cancer cells. Now, how in the heck would he know? because the needle itself has to be bigger and fatter than usual, okay, the opening, because cancer cells will clog a regular needle. They're like gelatin almost, okay? So it has to be a bigger, wider opening. That hurts. It's more painful. And they've got a jab to make sure it hits the vein. So, you know, and we explain how Castro, it'd be easy to inject into a vein because it simply is if you're, you know, if you do it right. So it's not the doctors who would kill, all his doctors love him. It'd be the nurse that's giving the injection. It'd be the tech that's giving the high dose of X-ray. These are people that you can change around, you can switch, or the person who puts the cancer cells in the refrigerator inside the penicillin bottle. You see, so easy. And it's what, it can stay alive. It's cold for like overnight and you can replace it if, you know. So this is what was set up. If he had gotten cancer because he was smoking incessantly, this was a lung cancer. Of course, Jack Ruby was, they diagnosed this as lung cancer, but they found pancreatic cancer cells. They're similar. They had villi. They had a little legs all over them. It's like if you have pancreatic cancer and you have these little look like filaments all over them, like they can wiggle around because of them. And here they're in Jack Ruby's lungs. And what did we have that we worked with? We worked with pancreatic cancer and made it into a very vicious lung cancer in that area. The same thing going. I have a young lady here I would like to have come up here for a moment. And if she would introduce herself. You're going to really love this woman. Her name is Celia. Explain who you are.
My name's Celia, and I'm a, I'm a physician. I'm trained in hematopathology, and I'm also a medical examiner. And when I first learned about Judy, it was because I was reading about Ed Haslam and Dr. Mary's monkey and reading through her working with the melanoma cells that she used to work with up at Roswell Park and then making RPMI medium. It's something I do every day, and reading her process describing exactly how they were working and mutating this. And it all clicked. I understood what she was talking about. I understood the concepts that absolutely, I think it was Ochsner didn't realize that he needed to radiate, that they couldn't get the cancer cells to take because you have to knock out the immune system to be able to, I mean,
That wasn't very well known.
and I think you were the one who figured it out, but yeah, that's sort of how it started and why I'm here. And I just, you know, I study cancer. Cancer is my specialty, and she's telling the truth. Everything that she talked about with developing it, what was going through it, just light bulbs going off. So I'm here to support you.
Don, how much longer do we have for this segment?
3 minutes.
Oh,
3?
3 minutes. Okay.
Okay, well, we're trying to get through this segment, and can you give me another question?
Yeah, I don't think you mentioned Carlos Lechuga yet. did you?
Oh, no, yes, Sylvia Duran, why would Lee want to bed? It's actually tell me that he had slept with Sylvia Duran, which he did. And the people have been arguing whether they're not. Recently, we had Philip, we had a investigator who is thinks that Lee killed Kennedy, went down. Yes, I found out. Yes, he was there, and that yes, he it's true that the relatives and all that said yes, that Sylvia dated him, and of course we have these documents that she told a legitimate contact that was trusted, that she actually slept with him and liked him from the start, you know, all that. And they tortured her over there because by arresting her and torturing her and getting her to admit it, then it'd be easy to say, well, they said that I had to say that under duress, and I had to say that under torture. So no, I didn't sleep with him. You see how it went? It went like that. Now, the bottom line, though, is that Lee has to make himself more important to the CIA. So what does he do? By getting a close relationship with Sylvia Duran, because we have Carlos Lechuga, Who is Carlos? Carlos Achuga wanted to marry Sylvia. He wrote a letter to his wife saying, I want to divorce you and marry Sylvia. And who is he? He's this Cuba's UN ambassador. Lee had gotten an liaison with the mistress of the Cuban ambassador, okay, to the UN. I mean, that makes him more valuable to CIA, so they're not going to go and knock him off. You see what I'm saying? That's why he did that. Okay, there's a lot more I could tell you about Mexico City. If you're all you authors or researchers, I've got documents, I've got the stuff. I don't know, I'm not saying I know everything or that I remember everything, but I remember enough. Thank you. Okay, I know that at the end, near the end of the conference like this, we have people have to go out and they find things to do and everything. I'm so grateful you're here. This is getting filmed, of course. It's going to be, but what I'm talking about now, and maybe people are tired of it, but I can't probably come again in person. And that's why I'm spending so much time this time with you now. That doesn't mean I won't be on Zoom, but it's not the same. I get to hug you here. I get to look in your eyes and tell you how much it means to me that you're here and that you care that much that you're here and made these sacrifices to come. It's not that easy. I'm very grateful for you. Okay. Now, we don't have an awful lot of time. There are going to be two sections. Really, Mr. Mueller here has relinquished some of his time so we can get some of this done. I'm really grateful for that. And I don't know what I've done without Garret, who stepped in to because of the change in plans and everything that have been made. One of the things I want to show you just to start off with is a book called Harvey and Lee by John Armstrong. Now, you just heard Dr. John Delane Williams tell you that Armstrong said that Lee Oswald didn't speak any Russian in Soviet Union because he was so fluent in Russian, it would have given it away. This is absolutely not the case. And I myself worked with Lee. He had flashcards in German. He had phonics cards in English so he could try to spell better. In fact, that happened because of me. I told him I had taken phonics in Catholic schools and they weren't teaching that anymore in the regular schools. And so phonics helps you to spell out words better because you have to actually do the, like information, and the shun, they were the S-H-U-N, is T-I-O-N, and go through all those. They really even help kids with dyslexia. All right, the bottom line being that Mr. Armstrong, for example, says that Harvey, called him Harvey, okay, did not have any, didn't dare speak Russian. Of course, Dr. Williams, you heard him say that Ernst Titovitz and everybody over there, of course, Lee spoke Russian. He did not do it when everybody in the room, if there was somebody in the room that did not speak Russian, then they went to English. That doesn't, and so when Armstrong talked to Ella, I think it was Ella, and all that, she said, well, he spoke English. And you just don't take that and run. You've got to find out if that's the way it was everywhere, right? All right, to make a long story short, Mr. Armstrong has made a lot of wonderful contributions with lots of new files. But then unfortunately, it reminds me of an artist, okay, who gets all these colors, they're gorgeous colors, and then he throws them with balloons against a wall, and he says he's created a work of art. Well, we have a work of art, all right, from Mr. Armstrong that consists of beautiful, wonderful files that he found, which he then uses to say that there were two people. One was Lee and one was Harvey. Then he goes to prove how different they are, so different that nobody in their right mind would ever have used them to interact or interchange with each other. But he has to do that to show they're different. The fact of the matter is that Lee told me that, see, he didn't know about Armstrong or anything, but all Lee told me is that when he came back, the CIA had made it possible for him to have some kind of record that he had ever left the country. And he didn't go into any detail, but he said it just so he could get a job. He could either say, he just got out of the Marines, or later he could say if somebody wanted to know more information, well, yes, I was here in America, of course. I never went to Russia. And it wouldn't come up about Russia. He would have some fake things that happened. Well, Armstrong had found some of these records and others were just tip-offs and tips as usual, whenever you have a murder case, you have all this stuff flowing in. So he's cherry picked out the ones that, might fit his thesis. Unfortunately, he is absolutely wrong. I'm inviting any of you who'd like to go to dinner with me, and I will show you. This book is filled. This is almost, over 800 pages. It's 970 or 980 pages or so. And most of the pages I have marked. That's how many. Another book I have marked, of course, is Mr. Brown's. And some of you have, you're holding that up. We don't want anybody to see the cover because I don't want anybody to buy it. But the point, but not really. The point is, we've written up the details. We had 96 errors that Mr. Brown made, saying that I had committed that are all wrong, and they're just not true. And I'm just one example. I just used one, the first one I opened at random, that said that Baker has talks about the Riley cards and that her initials are on them and all that, but she never shows the cards in the book. How many of you have me and Lee, book me and Lee? Are the cards in the book? Well, not according to him. All right. So that's what I'm talking about. So we've got a list of 96 of those kind of accusations, or silly things like, she said there's not supposed to be any paper trail, and here she wrote this, or he wrote that. Paper trail, of course, meaning the lab work we did and all the important stuff that wasn't supposed to reach the public, not stuff that was okay if it reached the public, for heaven's sakes. All right, so I invite you at dinner time. I would love to talk to anybody who wants to ruin their dinner with this. Sure.
And with regard to the Walt Brown book, Judyth asked me if I could get a copy of the Walt Brown book, a hard copy of it, because it was understanding at the time that it was only available on Kindle or one of those electronic things. I found a copy of the book. And she was patiently, well, you can find books, but anyway, she was patiently waiting for every day. She said, where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the book? And I said, I don't know. They said they were going to, it's from a secondary source, they said they're going to deliver it between this date and this date every day. She came, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And it finally came in on the last day, or maybe even a day late on the range. They got it. I gave it to her, and you could barely, she could barely stay in the room. Every page she opened up was just like, oh my God. It was, and I went, okay, just calm down. I said, she wanted to pull me aside every time she saw something to tell me all about what's wrong with it.
He's a lawyer with a lot of business, and
Yeah.
I was doing that.
I said, make a list, get a marker, and go through all of it at once. And, go through and do the whole thing. So we're not having an explosion every time you see something that's outrageous. So she did. And it really is, it's really remarkable. I don't know what the motivation was for writing the book. I've never met Mr. Brown as far as I know. I'm just saying, it was just astounding, the whatever you want to call it, errors or sloppiness just that got out there. It's legendary. It's almost Saturday Night Live material. And that is just so blatantly wrong. It's not just opinions, it's just false facts, information that's in there. And that was just my report of this from a personal standpoint. Every day she was waiting for this. And I said, I hope it says what you think it says, and it's that bad. And it was worse.
He said it all.
Well, with this bonus time, we're going to try to get to some more questions we had about New Orleans and Mexico City and Clinton and Jackson and some other things if we can.
Right.
And Mark, feel free to jump in with your comments and questions. So the one you wanted me to start with, Judyth, is name some communists and pro-Castro friends of Lee Oswald in New Orleans.
All right. I defy all of you, I should put it that way, to find one communist, one pro-Castro person that Lee had as a friend or even acquaintance. Name them. This person is such a terrible communist who's pro-Castro and is against policies of the United States. Try and name in the United States, where he was living all this time in New Orleans, okay? One, even one. There aren't any. Did you know that? Not one. Now, if you want to count Mr. Lee over in New York that he wrote and asked for the FPCC material that he needed, or when these are letters that he wrote, he didn't know Mr. Lee or anything, didn't know these people. That's the answer there.
Okay. New Orleans question. What did George de Mohrenschildt and Carrie Thornley and Judge Tim Botelho have to say about Lee Oswald and his concern for human rights?
Okay, so those names, which I'm going to read carefully, all right, you've got George de Mohrenschildt, Carrie Thornley, Judge Jim Botelho. You can't have three more people more different, okay, if you know about the subject. The point is, Jim was his Lee's bunkmate, okay, in the Marines. They were buddies. And of course, he has come here and told everybody what he thought of him. He thought of the most sterling character, a person you could trust. By the way, we heard about Gordon Nagel, excuse me. And did any of you hear Dr. Williams speak about Nagel? You heard him talk about him? Do you know that man knew Lee Oswald? And he told Dick Russell, or it's in Russell's book, I should say, if I were hanging from a rope and I could look down, you know, and I could fall a great distance. He said, and I had to depend on someone holding onto that rope, I would choose Lee Oswald. How about that? So what did they have in the same? George de Mohrenschildt, Carrie Thornley, Judge Jim Botelho. I'm going to say what Carrie Thornley said. He never met a man who was more concerned about human rights than Lee Oswald. Then they all had the same comment to make about him. And I concur.
Why did Dr. Ellen Oxner fear that DA Jim Garrison might have him arrested?
Alton Oxner was really concerned. It was in his book, Surgeon of the South. It's an authorized book that was made by all his friends after Oxner passed away, and called Surgeon of the South. And in there, he admitted that he was scared of Garrison. I didn't know about this. 60 Minutes brought up this document. There were two documents that they brought up where Oxner a prominent doctor in New Orleans was mentioned by Garrison, along with other names that you would recognize if you lived in New Orleans, descriptions, all right? And it was Oxner. So he wrote, is quoted in Surgeon of the South saying, I'm afraid that he's going to try and get me arrested. Now, why would he do that? Well, you've got to know my story, or that doesn't make any sense at all. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay.
Let me ask you a question about
Yes.
Oxner. Okay. Oxner was in New Orleans, and he was at one time a legitimate guy in the, smoking cancer causing thing. That was his a legit claim to fame. I'm saying that part was legit. Now, he was also a doctor. If I'm wrong about this, you help correct me. But didn't he also treat some of the Texas guys, the oil guys?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Dr. Oxner was very talented, especially in handling various conditions. Sid Richardson, Clint Murkison, and you have Hunt and others knew Oxner, and he was like their personal physician when they really had a problem. And in return, they gave him a lot of money. Anyway, he ended up getting invited like to Coon Creek Club, KKK. Oh, interesting.
That was a fun club.
Fun club, okay, in Texas, and Murkison and others invited him there, and Ball and Bell or whatever. The point is that he was playing poker with them, shooting quail with them, got a tugboat from them, a race course, a racetrack, okay, and other goodies, which he then sold. And I have to say, now, Oxner didn't take any of this stuff for himself. It was always for the clinic. So when he was given a Cadillac every year by three guys, what is he going to do with them all? Well, for one thing, he had some of them set up for the international trade mart. All of those records have disappeared on the cars because we're going to be talking about, Lee Oswald, David Ferry, and Clay Shaw actually used an international trademark car in order to go to Clinton, Louisiana, where they were seen together. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. We know that was international. That's where he got him. Oxner gave him why. Oxner ran the International House, which merged with International Trademark just a few years later. They were that close, okay? And all the stuff you hear about Permindex and other things going on, it all links in. Oxner is so close to some people that we have Madame Chenault visits him before Nixon decides whether what he thinks he's going to do. And then we have they consult Oxner on many things. He was consulted on what they call subversive, various things going on in medicine. Very interesting. So we have the records are in my book and they're elsewhere now. They have been spread. So now we're going to go on to the next question.
Well, in addition to Dr. Oxner, you wanted a chance to mention some other doctor names and how they
All
fit in
right,
the story.
yes, Dr. Alton Oxner, Dr. Harold Deal, Dr. George Moore, all three of the reason I'm using this is I'm trying to save time rather than say, well, yeah. Those three were crusading to get cigarettes out of public places and to stop people from smoking because they were sure it caused lung cancer. However, there was a lot of opposition, from big, we won't call it big pharma, we'll call it big smoky, okay? Trying to stop them. Right. Now, when I crashed the fourth annual Science Writers Seminar, where the most important cancer researchers were, at that time, Dr. Harold Deal was running it. He was a vice president of the American Cancer Society in charge of all the research for the American Cancer Society, sitting on the stage there. The police are about to haul me away and he stops them. See, I crashed. I was the only girl there. All these others were wearing white coats or they were wearing fancy suits. And here I am. What am I doing? I'm a high school student after all, and I'm short, And I've got my stuff and I want them to see my cancer stuff. And that's the only way I could do it because none of the local doctors can understand what I was doing anymore. So he gets me introduced to his wife who had breast cancer. Anyway, I got to know them. But all three of these doctors, Dr. Harold Urey was with them, Dr. Robert Robinson, and they were both Nobel Prize winners. They were there. They took a liking to me too. Turned out the Urey was born in Indiana and missed Indiana. We talked about that. I'm from Indiana and we had a lot in common on that. And Dr. Robert Robinson, his wife was up in Buffalo, and Dr. Moore, George Moore, was a pilot as well as a fantastic head of the Roswell Park Institute, which is the oldest institute in America that was doing cancer research. He was there right with Dr. Deal. And he says, I want you in my private lab after he saw what I did in a high school lab under a stadium with part of it had dirt floors, okay? So they went over to my high school, they checked everything out. They looked at all the stuff I had, along with Urey here. And you know what? They shut my lab down because it was so dangerous. And I had to get my germ-free. I did it with germ-free mice. I gave mice lung cancer in only 7 days. Nobody had ever done that before. And frankly, you'll never probably hear about it again because it's very expensive to use these germ-free mice. But I had a personal family friend, Dr. James Rainier from Notre Dame. And I was born only miles from Notre Dame myself. My whole family, part of my family actually donated land at Notre Dame. We have very close ties. And here we have Dr. James Rainier when he moves to St. Petersburg, Florida. And I got in contact with him. So Moore is saying, it was the devil for us to try and get any germ-free mice. And you knew Rainier's and you got your mice? Yes, I did. You see, so it was wonderful.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Make a comment about cancer, because it is, one of the areas that I'm involved with these days in law is toxic chemicals and exposure to people both in an occupational setting and also a residential setting. And so this is a paradox because you've got Alsner, who unquestionably was involved in something favorable in terms of attacking lung cancer by getting to the smoking thing. There's no question that smoking is, a contributory factor to cancer. Okay, so that's a big one. So in some ways you could go, gosh, Alzheimer was doing good despite the fact it should have a negative impact on big pharma, the tobacco companies, et cetera. However, at the same time, we're doing above ground nuclear testing, okay, all over the Nevada and the West and all this kind of stuff. We are increasing the numbers of X-rays, CT scans, diagnostic radiation technique all over the place. And we are dumping every kind of toxic chemical that we can find after World War II into everything, component in plastics, component, basically if there's a miracle molecule, okay, it's probably a problem because nature doesn't really have those kind of miracle things. So, if it's a DuPont, for example, Teflon, it's non-stick, right? That's not normal, and it's not a good thing. So that's one. Then the other is if something removes stains, okay, think of dry cleaning and chlorinated solvents. If something is good enough to pull out the stains from clothes and remove the thing, what is it going to do to your tissues, right? So anyway, just saying it's a paradox because you've got this one hand, it looks like they're doing good work on that kind of cancer, but then what about this other stuff, right? And we're all getting, yeah.
What I'd like to say, why he is so really dedicated to this, I want you to look at this man and I want you to think of talcum powder. Who got that stuff? People to understand that talc can cause ovarian cancer? Say yep.
Well, I've been involved in, I don't want to take too big a role here, but I was the science chair for the vaginal mesh cases, if you know what that is. And so that's where I got into researching the use of petrochemicals in plastics and what it does inside the body. And then I did start working on, and I'm taking all the credit for this at all, but I started looking at glyphosate, Roundup, okay, which is used in enormous amounts.
Okay, now I'm going to cut you off.
You cut me off.
I'm going to cut you. I'm going to cut him off.
My uncle was a cancer researcher.
Yeah, you understand why I'm interested in this person and what he knows. I'm only cutting you off because I'm. Yeah, it's all right. Anyway,
I started filling in blanks on things.
Yep, but this is why he's associated with all this. He understands. He has a basement that it's the biggest medical library I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty. Okay, the guy has. Oh, listen. All right. So anyway, you got the point. All right. So we have to go on. This man is worth listening to, and if you can grab him for dinner, and all that. I don't mean eat him, but he's fantastic. And he mentioned Roundup, and we have the talcum powder. You've got the mesh. You've got the other stuff. And I mean, I look at him, and I think I just look at him as a hero. I really do. Okay.
Is there anything more you wanted to say about?
I
the
just want to
fourth
say
annual seminar?
about this seminar and everything, and I think, see, he's putting me back on track.
There you go.
Right, and the point is that because of these three men, they're the most important cancer research doctors in America. Can you imagine that they're working together? I met all three of them. They basically mentored me. They put me on fast tracks, and Dr. Oxner brings me to New Orleans after lots of special training, but I had also worked with, as I say, Dr. Moore, and it was horrible, and you'll see it in my book, to realize that these wonderful doctors were just fine with injecting cancer cells into people without telling them. These people I admired were heroes to me. And Celia, can you come here just for a second? Because this is so important. It has to do with who you are and what you are about and why I got kicked out of cancer research, and I was doing good stuff. But see, you tell them what you read just a few minutes ago.
Well, so Judyth,
Tell them who you are, please.
oh, I'm Celia again. I'm a Harvard Hospital trained pathologist, specifically in hematopathology, and I'm also a forensic pathologist. And I was up there at Harvard training when I read me and Lee, and when I read Dr. Mary's Monkey, and my mouth just kept dropping over and over with every page turner regarding her cancer research and the people that she's talking about. I was going to ask you briefly, Ochsner was the president of the American Cancer Society, who was serving on the board of the American Cancer Society at the same time was Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of the OSS, that later CIA. But no, the point that I was going to bring up regarding everything that you were talking about, I mentioned to her, when you sign up to do human experiments in medicine, you have to go through institutional review board, which is where you have to be familiarized with human testing and the ethics of it and why it got instituted in the first place. And one of them, if you read some of the paperwork with how they figured out why we need to do this, is they quote somebody named Chester Southam, who was at Sloan Kettering and then turned into Memorial Sloan Kettering. He was trained by a notorious man that back in the 30s, Cornelius Rhodes. He was a doctor with the Rockefeller Institute, Rockefeller University. He was down in Puerto Rico injecting cancer cells into Puerto Ricans. But then he comes up, he gets turned into one of the US Army's researchers onto the Department of Chemical Warfare. That's what he was doing. And then he gets put in charge of Memorial Hospital that later became Memorial Sloan Kettering. And there he is training Chester Southam how to inject cancer cells into patients. And he was doing it at I think it was a Brooklyn Jewish, what was it, critical illness or it was a Jewish hospital in Brooklyn, and they were injecting cancer cells into these patients to see if they could grow or not. And if your immune system's actually functioning, it's going to reject any foreign cell that doesn't belong to you, so it will kill it off. So they were testing it in people that had autoimmune diseases and were sick and elderly.
1963, they were doing that.
They were doing it in the
That's
50s.
Information for us. They got that information for us.
And so these are the people that Chester Southam, he's the one that the institutional review boards, all the paperwork, they quote what he was doing. And Chester Southam's there with Harold Dill and with George Moore and right there with Ochsner. And
it broke my heart. It just broke my heart. Thank you. I hope what you're saying, this is a very qualified lady and she knows what she's talking about. And
Let me make one comment about this, okay, is that in World War II, there was a lot of, let's call it fairly unethical research going on by both the Germans and by the Japanese. And one of the things that determined whether or not these people that were at the end of the war were going to go free or not was whether they shared the information that they had. So basically all the horrible things, we condemn all the horrible things the Nazis did and the Japanese did, but we kept all the research that they did. And we paperclipped many of the people to come to this country to do work. If you scratch very far on any academic institution in this country that's high ranking, Ivy League, the schools in the South, Tulane, the other ones, guaranteed those are the ones that were first rank involved in things like MK Ultra, involved in chemical warfare, biological warfare, and that's what they were doing. Okay, it's okay to sacrifice for the betterment of all, right? Yeah, right. Sacrifice prisoners, people of color, especially, and mental health patients. Just absolutely a fact.
and elderly Jews in hospitals.
the one thing Judyth and I were talking about was I mentioned these scientists, Southam and Rhodes, and she mentioned in her new edition of her book, she brings up the articles where Southam is getting exposed. It got a little bit of negative press. And at the conference that she busted into, that she broke into, apparently they had been sticking up for Chester Southam and sticking up for medical experimentation and not needing informed consent. And that was included in your book, and it just.
It's all there. It's documented. I've got everything I've got is documented. Thank you.
I want to bring David Ferry into our discussion about cancer research. Why mine? So
Okay.
why was David Ferry interested in cancer research?
David Ferry's mother was suffering from cancer and eventually would die from it shortly before I met him, actually. And Dave used the excuse to take her on a nice trip to Italy. He actually went to and got involved with Permindex and Clay Shaw and all that kind of thing at the same time. But basically, he was a very intelligent person who was already interested in science anyway, and taught, actually even at Tulane, he taught courses in pilot mechanisms and everything. I go on again in detail. I'm just saying that the man had the capacity and the interest to develop his abilities in cancer research. He finally got, and he was associated with Dr. Robert Heath, who's CIA and all that, MK Ultra experiments he was involved in, and the cover stuff, you just can't believe it all. I mean, if they kind of just like, I'm just saying briefly, David Ferry was competent, but he ran into some problems where he had to go to Miami all the time. They needed an assistant. They requested a young assistant, someone, again, untraceable, and it was supposed to be Michael Riconosciuto. It's hard to pronounce his name, but anyway, he's verified that he was supposed to be there. He had been working, helping my guide minister who was going to bug his place and do bugging for him. And he was brilliant and was going to be the assistant. But I showed up early and all they knew was a young assistant. They didn't say, since Dave was a homosexual, they thought that they sent a female so that he wouldn't seduce their young assistant the wrong way or influence him the wrong way. So a lot of things happened to make them think that I was the one, and because I could do Russian and I had all these contexts, like, again, I had dated Tony Lopez Fresquet, whose father was the finance minister of Castro's Cuba, for heaven's sake. So I had all these connections with people and whose fathers or mothers or whatever were in the CIA and the anti-Castro thing, and I didn't know it. Anyway, I got involved and I didn't realize how deeply. There's a lot to say, but a lot of it's in the book now, and more of it's in the book than is in the original one, so that you bet, because of the questions that were raised.
Was Ferry's competency in the medical field gained by experience or any kind of formal training or education?
Okay, well, they're saying it's, yeah, the HSCA said, well, he had some education. Oh, good heavens. Well, it depends on what you talk about education. I mean, the man could read ancient Greek, modern Greek. He could read, I know because he gave me a book in modern Greek. He could read Italian and German. He could speak and all that. He knew Spanish and so on, all of it. But on top of that, he could discourse on Thomas Aquinas, of course, everything about Catholic Church and the history and all the doctrines and so on, because he was going to become a priest. And he got kicked out of 2 seminaries. And make the long story short, the man also was brilliant in various fields that had to do with like mechanics or engineering, especially though in medicine. He was so interesting. He was always experimenting even before he met Mary Sherman. Okay, because he taught his cadets. He had a big skeleton. It had all the nerves and all the veins, and it lit up, you know, the eyes had the light bulbs in them and stuff of the skull. I mean, he really wowed his cadets with all the stuff he knew, and he knew first aid. He knew, of course, he knew martial arts and so on. And he was just, it was a natural for him. So did he have formal education? No, but he learned very quickly. Mary showed him how to do various lab techniques. He learned and read up, and Ed Haslam knew it too. So we'll go on to the next one.
We're going to go to Mexico City now for some other questions we didn't get to earlier.
Yeah, see, Mexico City is, I didn't get a chance to say everything. probably won't get a chance to say everything about Clinton. So you'll have to come after dinner so I can tell you more about Clinton and Jackson. Okay. But anyway.
Marina said that Lee had started exercising when he decided to go to Cuba. Why would he do that?
Oh, yeah, this is cute. Marina says, for some reason, Lee, now he's exercising. He gets out of the shower and he scrubbed himself red and he's got to exercise and exercise. What's going on? Well, I'm going to Cuba. Of course, he said he's going to Cuba. He's not going to say he's going to Mexico, and that we are going to be exploring the wilds, and that sometimes I could run faster than he could. And that wasn't going to hold long. So he was started exercising, and it's even in Marina's memoir, and everything. Yeah, he was exercising. So we were going to be able to climb Chichen Itza. We were going to be able to do lots of hiking. I was very athletic. I had 3 athletic medals that were given to me. One was, actually volleyball, one was in a basketball, and one was for general athletics. For example, I was on their bowling team, things like that. And I'm doing that on top of the cancer research, on top of going to school, on top of having a lot of fun with boyfriends. Did I sleep? No.
Will you say a little bit more about your plans with Lee for your life together?
Yes, our plans basically were this. We thought that Lee, by spreading around that the FBI hated him and was after him and all that he'd be trusted by the other side, by the communists that were pervading Mexico, to the point where you had Catholic priests and nuns who were being deported from Cuba and things like And I say that because Lee, we wanted to marry with a Catholic priest so it wouldn't get in the civil records. Go down to a little village somewhere and say, Padre, will you please marry us? Well, are you Catholic? Because the first thing. So Lee had made a copy, and these poor padres in some little town, they're not going to be able to read English, but they know the word Catholic. So you see that on his Mexican visa application, which he made a copy of, it says that his religion is Catholic, even though shows you he never intended to really go to Cuba. It was anti-Catholic at the time. In fact, even Mexico was somewhat anti-Catholic because of the pervasion at that time of Marxism and all that. And in an earlier job application, he put Protestant, and usually he didn't put anything, because he really wasn't, but he put Catholic on this for our sake so that he could show a document that says Catholic on it that would convince a poor little padre somewhere that, yes, these two are Catholics, I shall marry them. That was the point of that. Go ahead.
And were you planning on living in Mexico for a while?
We planned to, originally, thank you for getting me on track. Yes, we planned to go to, we thought we'd be around Merida or places like that, and that we would be able to be informants, because the CIA was stretched pretty thin in other parts other than Mexico City and Merida. And we were willing to explore Mexico. And I ended up, with a degree in archaeology, a Bachelor of Science, because it's forensic anthropology, because I had so many medical stuff going on, as well as cultural anthropology. But that was my great dream, and to get deep into medicine and all that, but also to get a degree in that, and I did. And Lee Oswald was very interested in that kind of stuff too. So you find out that his mother, Marguerite, said that he wanted to write stories about contemporary Americans, but short stories. He wanted to be a writer, and he wanted to be a social worker or something like that. Yes.
The FBI and CIA claim that Lee stayed at the El Comercio Hotel in Mexico City. True or false?
False. Even though his name is on the register, that doesn't mean he stayed there. Or even though he ate a couple of meals there to make it look like he was there, he didn't stay there. He stayed in a nice hotel, okay, and where he could meet people that were in that area. And he gave me the name of the hotel, but it's one of the things I cannot remember. I would recognize it if I heard the name, but it was.
Let me ask you a question about Mexico City.
Yeah.
Quickly. If you covered it already, you already covered it. But Lee making a big stink at one of the embassies
Yeah.
down there about being all agitated and the FBI after him.
Is that Lee or not Lee?
Oh, yeah, that was Lee. And as I told everybody before, Lee wants to establish, of course, we plan to stay in, live in Mexico and to have a good cover. You can't be a good CIA informant if they think you're CIA or FBI, right? So he says, the FBI is after me. That's what he tells the Russians. And he puts his gun out there and says, I've got to protect myself with this gun. Yeah, that was Lee. And I went into a little more detail when you were here. Okay.
So if he had not been made the patsy, he thought he was still going to keep working for them.
That's right. We thought that that's what happened. Now, when things got nasty, when Oxner said, that you're both expendable, that didn't sit very well with us. Lee actually contacted someone that he knew in Cayman Islands. And there was a little house there. And I have to say that this man approached me during a certain period. I told my son and one of my daughters, my son barely remembers anyway. He kept this house for years and finally contacted me in Tampa when I was actually in a program there and said, this man, he set it up. He bought this little cottage that was on my property. And he said, you can have it if you want to move there. He said, otherwise I'm selling the property. I said, go sell it. What am I going to do? I've got 5 kids going to college and I cannot move to Cayman Islands to a little piece of property that Lee bought, but he did. He had resources that you would surprise you that he had. And one of the proof of that is we now know that they found a trust fund set up for Marina, and they said they didn't know where it came from. Of course, Lee, in my book, I explained it even in the earlier book, that Lee had set up a fund for Marina and his children in case anything happened to him, because he had been paid hazard pay as a fake defector. They've paid him extra. And that's why if you're ever going to see any of his tax returns ever, like 2039, I don't think they'll be the real ones, because the real ones would have shown that he got extra money from some source with the military. All right. And that allowed him to purchase some kind of life insurance and all that. And it was set up through the military in Baton Rouge. That's all I know.
Did you talk about how Lee was afforded to pay back to get back to the United States, where those funds came from?
Oh, well, yeah, we did. We talked about, yeah.
Here's a big picture question about
Yes.
Mexico City. The CIA and the presidents of Mexico were close. Why?
Oh, my goodness. The CIA and the presidents of Mexico, how close were they? The present president of Mexico at that time and his successors, 2 in a row, all had CIA code names. And we're working so closely. All their elections and everything was held through the CIA. They were CIA assets. 3 Mexican presidents in a row were CIA. How about that? It's in my book. You can see it for yourself.
This one might not sound like it's related to Mexico City, but I think it is. Why did the FBI raid 2 banks in Laredo, Texas after the assassination?
Yes, all right. Lee told me that he had placed funds for us. We're not going to go down there penniless. All right, in Laredo. And I had no way of showing that to anybody. And then I finally found a document saying that FBI agents went to Laredo and went into the safety deposit boxes. I actually went to Laredo and talked to a lot of people there, and they knew about this. I had a presentation to Dolores Quesada, took me there, and so we really did Laredo. There were only 2 banks at the time, and we got a lot of information that that Lee had. But when the FBI raided it, they said they found nothing. Just like they're never going to find anything about me, I suppose, in the CIA or anything. No, if your record has been taken away, then they say you're never there. Okay, I believe that the money had been there. Those 2 banks, it was in one or the other, and it vanished. And they said they found nothing. They also went to the lockers at the bus stations, and Lee told me he had put his best clothes there. He's got lousy clothes. And by the way, in Lee's possessions, you'll notice they don't show any t-shirts, they show no underwear. What the heck is going on? Some kind of, I don't know what's going on, but the fact of the matter is, interestingly enough, when I went from this is a fact, I went from Europe over to the United States, and plenty go on to Mexico. And TSA inspected my stuff, and when I got it back, all my underwear was missing. So anyway.
We're going to make some time. I'm not sure if there's a follow-up to that part, but I'm going to make some time for Clinton and Jackson for you
Yeah.
now. I know you've touched on it, but can you explain in more detail what really happened in Clinton when
Now,
Oswald,
this is the
Shaw,
thing,
and
I
Ferry?
have enough time now. We're going to go to Clinton and Jackson. Again, we're going to go back to other questions, and especially in New Orleans when I come back again. And I thank Mr. Mueller for giving us that time to do that. So
Clinton Jackson.
when we had this set up, we had set up some thermoses, and the thermoses looked like regular. Well, they used to have, screw-on caps, and they were metal, and inside was this glass liner. Heck, those glass liners, glass is what we grow cancer cells on. And these actually were clear liners. They didn't have the silver, okay? They were clear, so you could actually take them out and you could put them with light, and it keep the cells alive or whatever. The point is that these were like giant test tubes where they grew the cancer cells, and they had this medium. Now, I was the one who had memorized that special medium that's a precursor of the RPMI 1640 formula that we devised in Dr. Moore's lab. And I had helped improve in two aspects. And this medium was in there. Then they had an inferior medium that is, this is only good for maybe 3 days, maybe you want to push it 4, and you have to dump it out. All the cancer cells are stuck to the glass. They don't go out with that. You could actually put this in your mouth, gargle, and probably safely, because anything sloughing off is probably not enough to hurt anybody. It just isn't enough. And your stomach acids are going to do the rest. So, I mean, we made it look like chicken soup because we used a different kind of usually it turns it's bright red, and it turns yellow as the acids build up in the waste products. But this one, we wanted to start with yellow, so we had to turn a different color as it was getting older. The yellow looked like chicken soup, and if you taste it, it tastes like, boy, this is the lousiest chicken soup I ever tasted, So it passed. He had bananas, and he had crackers, and he had packets that looked like sugar, for coffee. And the sugar was actually, for the second thermos, was filled with sterile water. These packets would actually make another formula for emergency to extend the life a little longer. But that was it. That was so you've got about 8 days or so. So that's why when you have Lee Oswald saying, I've only got 3 days left, when he's got days and days left on his visa, he's talking about in his own stress there, he's only got 3 days left to save this stuff, and it'll be too late and it'll die. And if he can't pass it off to the right person, it's over. You can imagine how I felt. It was valuable stuff. We worked on it so long. It'd been created for such a long time. So now let's go back to there. You've got I think I had something else on it. What really happened? No, that's a different one. There it is.
Did you want to talk about that?
We're going to go back, and I just want to explain about the thermoses, because we had everything set up so that it would look just perfect, and that's what we had to use. We're going to use it. We're going to do a test run. He's going to take this down as a lunch bag to Clinton, then to Jackson. That's where the mental hospital is. But they've got to meet at a telephone.
Who was going to meet?
Here's the thing, in Clinton, they were waiting for a telephone call so they could join they had this convoy coming in, and they were supposed to join it. Can you imagine, you got a paddy wagon there, and it's full of, it's got 1 or more prisoners in it. It's going to go into the mental hospital. Now, if you have a big black Cadillac following that, or a police car in the Cadillac, nobody is going to stop. If you stop the first one, you're not going to stop the people in the following it, the next 2 cars or whatever. They all go in together. One of those black Cadillacs, that Cadillac was Clay Shaw's from the International Trade Mart, with David Ferry in it and with Lee Oswald in it. And Lee is carrying this material. David Ferry knows how to inject properly to get the cancer inside of you. Clay Shaw has the money. Clay Shaw had the black Cadillac that would fit right in with an official convoy. It looked just so official, it would go right in with them. But one problem, when are the prisoners released? There is red tape galore. So they couldn't just meet them and say, let's just meet, just before we go in. No, they've got to look like they're part of it before that. So they are waiting for when they can join outside. Angola, for you, Angola's down here. Here is Jackson. Here is Jackson Mental Hospital. Here is Clinton. So Lee and Ferry and Shaw are going up to Clinton, okay? And they're going to wait for a phone call, and then they're going to join this convoy, which is coming in the other direction from Jackson. They're going to meet in the middle, and then they're going to right to the mental hospital. So they do not want to meet in Jackson because it's a little bitty town. Really, a new person can walk through town and be noticed, let alone a Cadillac. But it's different over there in Clinton because that was the county court or the parish courthouse. And there were always people around and nobody would notice if Cadillac.
In that black Cadillac.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the kind of thing that was going on. The trouble is, as we said, I have a dream that happened, the Martin Luther King thing, and on Wednesday, on Thursday, this is when they think they're going to go into Clinton. Nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to notice. Instead, there's a whole line of black people, and they're staring at this Cadillac with white people in it, wondering if this FBI or CIA spying on them, you know. Oh, it was awful. And they couldn't leave because the only phone in town that was a pay phone that would ring, you know, anonymously was right there at the telephone exchange across the street from the courthouse. So everybody's staring at him. Lee gets out of the car and stands in line because as he got out of the car, just so he wouldn't be stared at like the rest of them, he did that. This woman came by and she was very upset because they were having the blacks, if they wanted to register, they had to pass a literacy test. So they opened this up. She was supposed to read part of the Constitution, and they said she failed and turned her away. She had an AA degree in business from the Tuskegee Institute. Boy, was she upset. So she was upset, and he loves, I said, civil rights. He said, what's the matter? And he found that out. Then he stood in line. He went back to the car. He said, I bet you $1. I'm a white person. I can go and just flash what my credentials, and they'll sign me in without even reading them. He said, I bet you $1 he'll do it. They all paid him $1. Clay Shaw did, Guy Bettis, David Ferry did, and over here, an aide that they picked up. The aide knew the layout of everything over there in the mental hospital, or all kinds of buildings. He had to be with us with them, in other words, because he had to direct them to where to go. Now, Clay Shaw went right through the front door when he finally got there with the convoy. And actually Lee and David Ferry never went through the front door, and we could kind of prove it because Lee, after they meet in the male patient's clinic in the back where they got the injections done, Lee has to have an excuse because he's going to come back and bring me to do a blood test within 72 hours. But if he shows up again, they're going to say, what are you doing here again, right? So he goes and asks the lady at the front desk back there, where is the personnel office so I can fill out a job application? It's very important because nobody could figure out why he was there. Joan Mellon and all of them got it wrong. He said, oh, they got him to, if he registered to vote, there in East Feliciana Parish, that they would be easier for him to get a job. That wasn't it at all. As I said, it was a bet he made. And he just used that as an excuse. We heard that from somebody else.
Let me ask you a question about that, though.
Yeah, we
That
got to
doesn't
hear.
make any sense to me.
Okay.
Why would he draw attention to himself, making a bet to go register to vote?
Okay, I can answer that. All right. First of all, they already had plenty of attention drawn to himself. All right. And because he cared so much about civil rights, this guy would take risks. And they didn't think anybody would, since they've been sitting, what would draw more attention? The fact that you've been sitting there for almost 3 hours, or that somebody gets out of the car and stands in line because they can't sit in the car any longer. I mean, you're already a spectacle already, and they didn't want that, but they couldn't leave. Anyway, he wasn't alone. He stood with the aide stood in line with him. Why? To keep him honest about the bet. So he actually stayed with him, though. So there are 2 of them in line, but they were noticed. Everybody, a number of people recognized the name of the aide. And we have the name of the aide that was involved with this. Now, none of this reached the Warren Commission or anything like that. Anyway, so he gets to the registration line at the end, and it's his turn. He flashes his stuff, said, go ahead and sign. he said, great, now I am a resident of East Feliciana Parish. The Ku Klux Klan, this guy who was in charge, he said, what, are you nuts? And he erased it, but you could still see some of it. Van Dishler came up there from Garrison, they could still find the O and stuff like that that was written down there. He said, get out of here, you know, you're nuts, you're crazy. But he won his bet. You see, that was the point. But the other part of that that's really important is that he didn't have any kind of ID that was from East Feliciana Parish. That's important because he did that knowing it would be that it would never pass. And so why can they say that they drove him 110 miles up there to have him get in line so he could register to vote with the wrong ID when you've got to at least fake something? Obviously, they didn't do that. And they try to say, yes, they brought him up there so he could register and then he could get the job. And then they could say he has a mental case because he worked at a mental hospital. Therefore, he's a mental case. So I'm saying all of that is just way off of what was really going on. The real fact of the matter is that he just signed up on just as because he was like that. And I'll give you an example of how he would draw attention to himself.
This is an unusual human kind of thing.
It is.
What really happened?
Yeah, they do. It's, for example, I'm going to give you another example of something weird Lee did. I said, Lee, I'm just so proud of you. I know you're a hero and all that. And he said, well, you know, the people around you, they don't know I'm a hero. And I said, you know, I know what you really are. And no matter what you have to pretend to be. He said, oh, really? And he stuck his head out the window and went, blah. He said, do you still want to sit next to me?
Judyth, Mr. Moffett has a question.
Yes, Mr. Moffett.
More of a comment. It may help to understand that Jackson, Louisiana, still has only one traffic light in it. It probably didn't have one in the 60s. A black Cadillac will show out just as much today as it did then, and the KKK is still very strong there.
That's right. And the reason that they wondered about, the town marshal actually went over there and got the ID and it said Clay Shaw, the international trademark, right on the ID. So they couldn't get out of that at all, you know, but that's why they sit there that long. Yes.
I think we're going to break soon, but I want to fit in one more question. You
Yes.
mentioned the mental hospital. Lee applied for a job there. Why?
Yes. All right. Yes. Okay. Again, yes, he had applied for a job and that the theorists tried to use it to say, yes, they drove him up there with the wrong ID, 110 miles. The busy Clay Shaw is going to take off from his time of work to sit in 3.5 hours and watch Lee stand in line. If they only dropped him off for that, they would have gone around the corner at least and got out of sight. But they were stuck by that payphone. Okay. Now, when you're saying, wait a minute, where was I here?
I asked you why he applied for a job.
Yeah,
at
you
the
can tell how
mental
tired I am. All right, why did he apply for the job? Because he had to come back. And if he came back and was noticed by any of these people over at Jackson Hospital area, and there were a number of people there, how is he going to explain why he's back on a Saturday when it's closed? Well, it makes him look stupid. I came back because I had to check to see if anybody's looked at my job application on Saturday when it's closed. Yeah, right.
Now, what did that have to do with sightings of a woman in an old car associated
Yes,
with
the
Oswald
woman
and
in the
Jackson?
old car, I have challenged anybody to say who that was, okay, because that was me. I was seen by back of my head and I was sitting in the car that Lee drove. And Lee McGee said, the barber, we had to stop there because the car got overheated and Lee also directions. Now, when Lee came up from Clinton and was sitting in the car that way, this time he's coming from Jackson. And you know what? In Jackson, they did not have any signs telling where to go to the mental hospital. He really had to stop and find out information. He wasn't ready for that. So he had to make an excuse that he needed a haircut. Lee McGee asked me, I went up and talked to him and Lee said to me, all right, you just tell me what kind of haircut I gave Lee and then I'll know if you saw him. And I said, sir, I didn't see that you gave him a haircut. And he said, you're right. I did not give him anything like a haircut. So then he believed me and we got him on tape and everything.
Okay. Thank you. All set?
So we've got a lot more to say, and I hope you come back this evening, all right?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are live in Dallas and those of you who are watching us via Zoom or possibly from YouTube, this will be Judyth Berry Baker's last live conference. Her swan song here at a live conference. And before she goes into what she's going to talk about with Garret, one of the things I always encourage her to do is to talk about her relationship with Lee. No one else can do that. No one else can put the humanity into their relationship as she can, because there's so much of that has been wildly distorted in the wrong direction. So I asked her to do that, and she said, well, Don, why don't you go ahead and ask me a couple of those questions? And so that's what I'm going to do. And one of the questions I wanted her to answer, if she's willing to, is just tell us, Bob, hers is none.
One. I'm 3, she's 1. Mine works. 1 is off, but you can use mine.
Okay. Well, we're going to blend our talents here.
Okay, so the question I have for you, Judyth, is if you would tell us what it was that you loved about Lee.
Everything. It's just a simple
The
answer.
little details that maybe you haven't talked about. I mean, you
All right.
on
Well,
our tour.
there are certain things about him that were I thought were extremely unique. And of course, there are physical things as I was so young that probably wouldn't be important as they were then, you know. But one of the things I liked about him is how he taught me to walk with my feet without being splayed. He said, we're not lizards. We see walk like this, you know. And he walks with his feet straight ahead. And I do too. He taught me to do that. This is one of those things. And when it was, I remember Anna Lewis saying he was so bossy to her, and if he said jump, she would jump. But he wasn't really that bossy. It's just that Anna, nobody could tell Anna what to do. You know, she was, she had like 10 kids and all that. And I guess that she really was very good at that, telling people what to do. But she thought I was kind of stuck up. So here's Lee. He would guide me. I like to be guided. Now, not every woman feels like that, but you know, I would ask him, what would you like me to wear? And things like that. But sometimes we would tease each other and everything. He had a tremendous sense of humor. He liked to draw cartoons, and we don't have any of those cartoons, so that you have no idea that he could draw cartoons. But the one I like to explain about his sense of humor, Georgia Morrinshield had the same, enjoyed some of his political jokes. And he did sort of like political cartoons. This one was, some of you may have heard this already. It was a crocodile just sitting there in the sun. He's got his eyes closed. And all of a sudden, yip, 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 yip. And you can see a dog is chewing on his tail. Just, you know, and his eye opens, you know. And then there's the kind of a frown, you know, on his face. The next scene shows there's real gashes in the poor crocodile's tail. And the crocodile's really like that, you know. And the third one shows a crocodile, you see, you can see a tail, and the croc has swallowed him alive, you know, because he couldn't get rid of him. And the next one shows him hauling off the crocodiles as a dog killer, you know, all bound up and everything, you know, nasty crocodile dog killer. Well, he drew that. So he has this ironic sense of humor. And he looked at the world, though, with when he saw something that was very sad, he could not pass a puppy without petting it. And any animal he saw, and I've talked about this before, it's also in the book, but he would say, hello, Mr. Cat, or hello, Mr. Dog, or hello, Mr. Toad. I mean, it was just, that's what he did, or you know, if it's kitty cat, it'd be Mrs. Kitty or whatever. And it was just charming. I mean, that he would interact a lot with animals. Some people said, well, Hitler loved dogs, you know. I can't, you can never please everybody, okay, about how someone is. He loved kids so much. And where is our Lee Harvey? Was a friend of mine. This is what, and also we want a closing prayer. And could we do Lee Harvey as a friend of mine now? Is it possible?
It'll probably take a minute or two to.
Okay,
Why
but
don't we do it at the
get it
end?
ready. So now I have talked enough about Homer Henderson. I am convinced that Homer and someone in his band and all that, Lee Oswald lived near a lake when he came back, when he was living there in Oak Cliff, okay? And I've taken people on tours at least twice now, maybe 3 times, and showed them how close it was to where he lived. He didn't have to walk very far to go fishing. He went fishing all the time. And knowing Lee, I wasn't there, but that song goes, he used to take me fishing all the time, these kids, and he certainly did, had the kids follow him along, and he played Pied Piper with, he said, come on, follow me. And he had them, like he'd hop on one foot and then hop on the other, and he'd display his arms, and he'd have the kids who would be following, displaying their arms. And I mean, they had so much fun with him. The last day that he had, it was normal. When he went back to Irving to visit his little toddler girl, he spent most of that time outside until it was too dark, playing with the kids, all the neighborhood kids. And what did he do? Pat Hall says that when she was about 11 years old and Mr. Lee was at the rooming house there, that he was the only one that got kitchen privileges because her mother liked him so much, or her grandmother, I should say, okay? So he could fix his sandwiches or whatever in there.
And she said that of all the people who had ever stayed at the rooming house, and that numbered in what, the hundreds?
Oh, gosh.
Easily
yes.
hundreds.
Yeah.
Of hundreds of people who had stayed at the rooming house, Lee Oswald was the only person who got kitchen privileges.
Yeah, that's because he was such a nasty guy, She just loved it. They play with her grandchildren, see, and she just loved it. And so Lee, this is the loner and the antisocial Lee. No, he had to act that way. I saw it on the bus and other places. When he advised me, for example, we have to act very stupid now. That's when we went to the Antoine's, and Jack Ruby and others were there, and it was very important to act like we were very stupid, he said, which we did. It was fun to act stupid. I've had to act smart most of the time, and here I could say really silly things. I remember when we were eating, and we had oysters, Rockefeller, or oysters, whatever they were. Oh my gosh, they were good. And I have a memory when I just said that, I literally could see all the food we were eating that day in front of me. I just see things in pictures, so it's very easy for me to remember things. So I remember how everything was served, and the crab that we had, and the and the bread pudding with it was on top of. We had lemon. We had the pudding like under it, and it was okay. All that stuff and rum on top. So as we're eating all this and everything, I would do something really silly, like, oh dear, I dropped my napkin. Where's my napkin? Oh, where'd it go? I mean, that's so dumb, they thought I was charming and all that. And so they kept me, I was like and it was fun to act like that. I felt like I was in a spy thing, some kind of spy novel or something. I dressed up as Marina. Half of that time it was just for fun. It wasn't you're going to dress like Marina and you're going to, act like Marina so we can go around and nobody will know I'm really going around with someone else, it's not my wife. But it wasn't like that. It was like, let's do it. Let's see if we can get away with it. See, like, we didn't know what things are going to end up with Lee arrested and killing Kennedy and horrible things like that. It just, we had periods of time, and many people, I've received many, I'm talking about dozens of letters from people who wrote something like, you brought New Orleans back to me, back to my memories, and others saying you nailed it about what New Orleans was like. because from a city that I was terrified to be in, scared, my first letter says, I don't even want to live in this New Orleans. I wrote that to my fiance coming. You bet what I was going to spring on him is going to go to Tulane Medical School, but I sure wasn't interested in living in New Orleans proper. You know, I will commute. I will do anything not to live where every time I look down, I'm just going to step on broken glass, you know, and stuff like that. And he changed that whole image in my head from the person that I almost got off the bus for the first time. I sat next to a woman who had a necklace made of chicken legs, chicken feet she was wearing, okay, and smelled like, I can't tell you what, you do not want to know what it smelled like, what she smelled like. And I got off the bus and I saw a woman, a kind of heavy set white woman. She's talking to a black man. I thought, oh, how nice. They're getting along here. I thought things were bad. And then she picked up a bottle and threw it at him and it exploded, almost hit me in the face. And he ran like crazy. And, you know, I'm scared of this place. That was culture shock, you know. And Lee turned that into a city of romance and intrigue and beauty and excitement. He transformed it. I felt like I was on a flying carpet with a prince. He turned into a prince. He grew a lot that summer because he finally had someone he could talk about the deepest subjects. And with David Ferry helped too, because he kept talking to us about ethics and morality, to the point that near the end there, we asked for Aristotle, the book of Aristotle, for heaven's sakes, here in New Orleans, and we want to read it together about this is the first time that somebody really wrote about ethics and morality, because we're talking about killing Castro, and we're talking about, is it right to murder to save many, or what is it about, or should we never do it, and so on. These thoughts were in our minds. Did Lee Oswald ever want to go and kill anybody? He didn't have it in him. Anybody who knew Lee, and we've got a number of people, even Martello said, and this was he was the lieutenant at the time who interrogated Lee. Lee was being really abused in New Orleans when he got arrested, okay, August 9th, and they had him overnight. And I think I've told most of you know, he was given his dinner there with the other inmates that were in there. He was in a cell with they were thugs, and they were bigger than he was and everything like that. But when the police served him his dinner, they peeled back a cover that was over it and threw a handful of dirt and dead roaches from the corner of the jail on top of that food and handed it to him. He said, roach a la mode. You know, and some of you heard that story before, but you remember, I'm talking about things that really stood out for me. And so how did he get along with those? Some of you have maybe seen the film Trading Places, where that rich, spoiled brat kid, a guy, you know, he's thrown in with all these guys. They're all, and he says, they tried to rape me and all these things. You know, he's very upset. He's trying to tell his rich girlfriend, get me out of here. And she can hardly stand it. He's wearing old clothes, you know, and he looks terrible and all that. I just thought, you know, Lee got along just fine with those guys in there. They didn't bother him at all. And I think they knew he would stand his ground. You know, he had no problem. He didn't complain one bit about, and it was so hot in the cell there, everybody took off all their plants that were in their underpants. You may not have known that. They were all in their underpants in there. And Marina thought that was dreadful that he took off his long pants, but they were roasting and they were all packed in there, you know. And he thought that was really funny, you know. And anyway, so he always tried to look at the funny side of things. He always had a comment to make that I'm sure got him in trouble in school sometimes. But the main thing is his tenderness. First of all, he could be tough as nails. He wouldn't complain. This man did not complain about things that it just didn't, he wouldn't get, but yet he was always solicitous if I was okay, you know, and everything like that. He was so gentle, and he was a wonderful lover. I had a comparison. I had a very good lover in my husband, And I've tried to talk to my son about, it. Mom, I don't want to listen to this, you know. I said, yeah, but it's going to get lost. I mean, you're my heir and you're the one who knows this, but if you don't know this, because it was such a big part of our life. And sex is when you're, that young. And we were young and strong and clean. The cleanness is the thing. I was someone who wouldn't, well, I'll just put this, close the curtains, please, like that, and he got me to not think of my body as something that you have to always hide. He believed in being, what do I say, natural. Not that he also appreciated modesty. I'm not meaning that he tried to get me to walk around in bikinis or something like that, but he made me accept my body as it was, as a beautiful thing. Even though I had a great big scar on my abdomen, and he said, what scar? I mean, it was just like that with him. And he made me feel comfortable with him in such a non-aggressive way, and so sweetly and slowly. And this, I call it slow love, because he just took me to the moon, and he did it wasn't fast as lightning. It was just as slow as could be. And so I just hit the highs. It was wonderful. So he's so thoughtful. Now I've gotten very intimate, but I'm not going to be speaking in a live audience, I hope, anymore, because my heart's been poured out. I can't tell you how much I loved him and how cruel he's been treated and how much he doesn't deserve what's happened to him. And I kind of never get over this. I'll never get over the sorrow I feel losing him, seeing him shot on TV. And I owe him this. I owe him so much more. He made me more human. I was too much a scientist. I wasn't in touch with my own soul, and he made me come alive. He was gentle, and to do what they did to him, they knew he would never betray his country. That meant he couldn't say I'm CIA, because all the contacts he had, they would have killed him. Even our own people probably would have killed his closest contacts rather than let them speak out. I have no idea, but I do know one thing. He wasn't going to rat on anybody, because he just took the responsibility. And as he told me the last night I ever talked to him on the phone, he said, I know what I'm getting into. That he said, he said this a couple times. He said, I made an oath to obey my president. He said, I can't obey a dead president. He said, the other thing he said, as long as my heart is beating, I'm yours. I belong to you. So it wasn't that I belonged to him. We belonged to each other. And everything was like that. It was balanced. Like I said, you catch the fish, you clean them. I'll cook them. I'll bone them. And, you got them. We just worked everything out, and we had ideas that we would live in the wilderness. I love wilderness survival. Any of you guys need any survival ideas? Let me give you one little example. If you worry about buying and selling, how many of you worry that it could get that way? Some of a Christian among us do, that you may not be able to buy or sell unless you take a certain mark or something like that. That can be a concern, as we see a foreshadowing of that, in that maybe if you don't take some vaccine or something sometime, that you may be forced that you can't work. That's happening to some people. It's happened to people I know. They've had to quit their jobs or got fired. And I know people have had to take for harassment, they've had to take the test every day, or once a week at least, to show they haven't gotten COVID. Can you imagine, what are you going to do to survive? Write to me, I'll show you what you can do, ways you can survive and even thrive. Anyway, we did that. We built ideas. Would you eat locusts? No. Okay. I said, well, look, white grubs, you just, you break open a log and scoop up those grubs, do crisp them up a little bit in the frying pan, you've got fat, and you can use that fat then to cook stuff in, it won't stick, you know? So he's going, and by the way, Mr. Brown said, Oswald, who was an atheist, he would never have said to thank God for this woman. Well, he sure did. He looked up to heaven because he said Marina wouldn't get her foot dirty. And I said, I don't care, I'll get my feet dirty. I said, after all, you'll wash them. So we had these jokes going on, and we just enjoyed all normal, natural, as much as it could be.
Let me add something now, Judith, if I could, because I think it's really
Yeah,
important.
I've carried on.
Part of the story, one of the things that I think hopefully you heard, I shared earlier that, when I read Me and Lee, I read it in a day and a half, and it's a very thick book, and I'm not a fast reader, but I was so intrigued. And there were two things that I really got out of it. The first was the historical importance of what I was reading. But second, and maybe in some respects more important for me in my life, was what a beautiful love story. And one of the things that I've taken away from it, and I've told people, and it seems maybe a little strange, Judyth Vary Baker has given me an appreciation for love that I didn't have before. She only knew Lee for a very short period of time, and here, 58 years later, she's still fighting for the man that she loved for only a few months during the summer of '63.
5 months.
Putting up with untold amounts of abuse because that love was so strong. She's helped me learn a little bit more about love, and that's why I made up those pins for her and for us. It said live love. She's a shining example of living love. So I'm going to turn it back over to her and let her do whatever she wants to, because this is her final act.
Once you learn what real love is, my friend, it's easy to give it to others too. And so, I feel love for all of you. And I learned one thing, that we have a gift. God gave us a gift, and that gift was that we can die. Now, that may sound funny, but when you say a prayer or you give time to someone else, you're giving of a limited amount of time of your life. It has value. If you live forever, where's your value? You give time, but it doesn't make any difference because time is endless. But when you offer 5 days of your life or 5 months, or you're with a partner for 10 years, you've done a wonderful thing for that person. And it's that gift of love. It gives us dignity to be able to die, even to be able to suffer. It gives us dignity and I like to tell people this, that we're not God's little pet dogs. He gives us dignity by giving us the opportunities to work through our troubles and get through to the other side and be victorious, and not to become bitter or ugly or mean. That's our challenge, is to be good to each other and to love each other. And Lee made me feel, my husband abandoned me, my first love, got married, and he was gone the next within 35 hours or so. He was gone for weeks and wouldn't let me know where he was and all that, and treated pretty shabbily, really. Well, terribly, actually, many times. I even got sent a postcard when he was too busy going through New Orleans. He sent me a postcard, dropped it in when he was in New Orleans, it's postmarked New Orleans. And he says, boy, is it hot here. I'll see you next time I come through. This is my new husband, So now I'm going to go on to these questions and things like that. But I just want to say that once you've had love, and not all of us find this, but it does exist. And don't feel upset with your partner if they don't give you love all the time. Remember, they're giving you what they can. And, if you can't work it out, too often we're abandoning. I remained with my first so-called love, okay, because I had to, but I learned to love him. I had 5 babies finally. But Lee asked me, said, please, will you have babies for me? When he knew he was going to die, he knew that would keep me alive. And the other thing he said, please tell my little girls that I was a good guy. That's all he asked of me. And I can't tell you how embarrassed and ashamed I am that I waited so long. His little girls grew up. I owe Lee so much, and especially to have an enhanced humanity from that calculating scientific machine, and with my machine-like brain, it can be like that. He grew my brain to be really human. Okay? Thank you.
That was such a beautiful soliloquy. I feel a little anticlimactic to ask questions, but you would like to answer some?
Yep, well, yes, because it's the last time I'm really going to be live, and then you guys can respond if you want.
Let me, before I ask the next question, I just want to quickly tell you that really on the spur of the moment, George Webb was a huge internet presence, hundreds of thousands of followers. Heard about Judyth's conference, tracked her down, interviewed her over dinner tonight. And I think you said he's going to be rebroadcasting the conference soon
Yes,
for
he's going
his.
to be broadcasting the conference on his web, big, huge web presence in YouTube, on YouTube and everything.
So spreading Judyth's story to hundreds of thousands more people.
So on Twitter? Oh, good.
Okay, we have a question that's come in on the Zoom Q&A. For Judyth, if I didn't miss it being covered already, where do you think Lee was going on November 22nd as he went back to the boarding house to get his jacket and then the theater after the shooting? Why does she think he took off as he was the only one to leave the Texas School Book Depository?
This thing about only one to leave, there were others that already were outside, never came back inside, and they don't even count those as being missing, okay? But he asked Truly, and Truly said so. He asked if he could leave. But Truly put his name right up at the top after listening to the policeman. The only policeman that actually went into that building, everybody, all the other police went up on top of the grassy knoll. That's where they went. Somehow Baker, and this thing by the way about pigeons only going off of that building, they were going off all the buildings. So how did he figure it that one? Anyway, I don't trust Mr. Baker at all. It's another Mr. Baker in my life, okay, but I don't trust that one, this one either. Marion Baker, when he first described running into the building and all that, and with Mr. Truly following, gee, they didn't even mention anything about the second floor encounter in the lunchroom. That came later. Did you know that? It's not in their first description. It evolved to become the description. But anyway, back to, would you read, I'd like you to read part of that again, because there's one section of that question that I really would like to.
Why does she think he took off as the only one to leave and he went back to the boarding
All
house?
right, that's it, stop.
Yeah.
I do not believe that was him that went back to the boarding house. This guy who ran into the theater was like a duplicate, and they could have even put makeup on him and everything to make him look exactly like Lee with putty and everything. I'm serious. As long as he doesn't get caught by anybody who's not in on it, or even so, you'd be surprised how much makeup you can put on. I don't know what they did, but that man looked so much like Lee, all right? But Earlene Roberts was blind in one eye, and she's watching TV, and when he comes in, she asks him something. Now, Pat Hall said every time Mr. Lee, remember she's that little girl in the rooming house there, he always stopped and said, remember, I said how polite he is? So Earlene Roberts, the housekeeper there, says, hey, the president's been killed on the TV. He doesn't reply. This is not Lee Oswald. If you knew him, you say, huh, wait, I thought about it. Wait a minute. He didn't answer her. He's always so polite, especially older people. Like when they said, who hit you? He said, a policeman hit me. He didn't say a cop hit me. He said, a policeman hit me when they were asking about his black eye, and everything in the midnight conference. He politely said, policeman. So I wondered, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like him. And then it says he went in there and came out and was zipping up a jacket. Yeah, I was trying to remember any zip up jacket he had, all right? And certainly he didn't have any that were that color, this light gray or whatever. He didn't have one like that. Did he go in the middle of the summer when he went back? You got to remember when he goes back and it's just early October. And do you think he's going to go and buy a jacket? Did he buy a jacket? Maybe he did by November, all right? But I'm going to tell you one thing. They found a jacket in the domino room, okay? weeks later that was identified as his jacket. So what jacket was it that they found that was discarded? It was from this man that ran out after the Tippit shooting, and they said it belonged to Lee Oswald, even though it was size medium instead of size small, and it had dry cleaning marks in it. Dry clean, when Lee always hand washed, or he washed his clothes as often as Marina did, okay? They hand wash their clothes off in the bathtub. I did the same thing. So why am I mentioning it? We have two great Swedish investigators who have looked into this, and it's very interesting. They don't believe that was him at all. We think it may be that he went in there and planted that holster, because the housekeeper, they never noticed a gun holster in there before. There it is. We think that man went in, planted the holster, and left it to set him up. We think that Lee was picked up right away and taken right away to the Texas Theater, because we have Butch Burroughs and others saying that he was in there minutes. You could count, the definite time period that he was in there before Tippit was shot. So who ran in? It looked just like him. And what is this about what he was wearing? We know that we have a police report that a man was arrested on the balcony, and it was Lee Oswald. And we have another report that says he was arrested down there in the theater, okay, in the orchestra level. I mean, what's going on here? So we have witnesses saying they saw Lee Oswald. They thought it was Lee being taken out the back door of the theater. At the same time, Lee is being taken out the front door. And out the front door, they're yelling and screaming, "Kill the president, will you?" Where'd the crowd get that idea? And where'd that crowd come from? Who tipped the crowd off to show up at the Texas Theater when one man supposedly ran in without paying a ticket? And then you even have the detectives there. You even have FBI there. Everybody's there to arrest Lee Oswald. And they put on his arrest paper, he was arrested at 1:40 p.m., which is 5 minutes before he came out of the theater. And they've already got it all worked up that he already has killed the president, and that he shot and wounded Governor Connolly, and he hasn't even been frisked yet. So what a setup.
The jacket that they did get, did they ever run forensics on that jacket?
They only, actually, I don't even know where that jacket is now. These things disappear, just like the wallet they found at Tippit's murder scene. It was on TV, you could see it in their hands. And we have Rookstool, Ferris Rookstool, no friend of Lee Oswald's, okay, claiming Oswald killed, Lee killed Tippit. But he says, he knows that wallet existed. Well, it disappeared because wallet number 2 happened to be in Lee Oswald's back pocket when they arrested him, and they open it up and they say over the intercom, "We have his ID." And of course, that ID said, there's ID in there that was planted, because by the way, I saw Lee's wallet, and he had a girlfriend in there that they've never talked about. Picture of her, had picture of Marina, had picture of a couple other things. I can't remember all of them, but I was looking for the girls, of course, naturally. But I didn't see any Heidel ID or anything. I think that stuff was stuck in there. I don't believe that Lee would carry, suddenly put incriminating stuff into his own wallet, okay? But anyway, that's 2 wallets. Then there's a third wallet that was at his place. That was from the Soviet Union. One of them was red that I saw, but they have come up with a black wallet. And altogether, they've come up with 4 wallets belonging to Lee Oswald. Take your pick. All right. I guess, that's the way it went. So I dispute the idea that he was actually went into the boarding house.
So why did the real Lee, your Lee, when he realized he might be the patsy, why did he not run?
All right, he didn't run because if he had run, he already told me this. I said, "Please, why don't you just get out of here?" And he said, "If I were the cowardly lion," he said, "I would." But he said, what would happen to us? What would happen to me? What would happen to his little girls? What would happen to his wife? What would happen to everybody he loved? He said they'd all be killed, and they'd probably track him down and kill him anyway. He said he has to stick it out, and he has no choice. This is the man who decided you're going to face death and right straight on, rather than anybody else get hurt.
Why did Lee not say he was CIA during the midnight press conference?
He didn't say Lee didn't say CIA, because if he had, remember, he'd been in the Soviet Union. He actually, Tenhave, I've got to tell you this, is coming out in his new book, okay? He has a second book on Lee, and he said Lee made hand grenades. He was trying to make hand grenades. Everyone thought that was so cool, but he said they had the wrong stuff inside it. He took components from the radar part of the radar plant and he was putting them in there. And he said, that's not going to work. You know, he's an engineer. I thought, how clever of Lee. He has sneaked out. He told me he sent over there about radar, and you could see that. I've mentioned at other conferences. And here now Tenhave came out this year saying that Lee had made these so-called hand grenades just for fun, so they can pretend they're mullet. Of course, they never used them. He saw them. And what Lee has done actually is he smuggled in Elvis records in, and I think he smuggled out components for their radar stuff that they were working on there at the plant to the United States, because he told me as a radar man, he was supposed to watch for contrails. He's supposed to watch for low flying, high flying planes in that Minsk area, wherever he was placed, you know, and to find out what radar installations to buy. Goodness, they were making parts for radar there. And Tenhave says, yeah, he was putting in grenades. And I said, isn't that clever? He said, the grenades weren't going to work with that. Didn't he see Lee's playing this dumb card? I made something that doesn't work, but he's got the stuff that he's got radar components. And he leaves not that long after for the United States. And I'm sure that we know that a suitcase vanished in New York after they landed. And I wonder what was in that suitcase. Okay, anyway.
On November 23, Lee made a call from jail. Would you please tell us the significance of the rally call?
Yes, how many of you heard Grover Proctor's year before last? 1, 2. It was fantastic, wasn't it? And you know, it's gone to, I think, to 2 million views now, his story, the rally. Lee called again. Lee was never positive sure who his handler was, but he deducted that it had to be most likely David Atlee Phillips. But the call to Raleigh is very interesting because it went to I'm going to be very brief, it went to a cutout. That someone else who would get and contact his handler and say, look, I'm in trouble. And according to Grover Proctor, Dr. Proctor, and I believe him, I certainly do, that was really his death knell, if not before. If the CIA was going to have anything to do with him, the last thing they wanted to do was respond to a call from a cutout. It meant they were never going to do anything for him. But I believe by then Lee thought he had nothing to lose, at least to try.
Don, how much time do we have? Okay.
Okay.
Because there's some questions that
Yeah.
Judyth prioritized, so we'll try to get to these. Did your Lee Oswald shoot at General Edwin Walker?
Oh, yeah, this is important. No, Lee never shot at General Walker. Don't ever believe a word of that. They've got this note that says, Marina, you know, if I get arrested and all these bad things happen to me, you know, you can go to, you know, you'll get help from the White Russians, you know, this is where I paid the rent, you know, things are okay, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And this, by the way, who finds this letter in a recipe, in a child care book or whatever, calendar, whatever, hands it over Ruth Payne. Either it was forged or, like Lee told me, soon after the Walker attempt on Walker, okay, which Lee was not involved in, although he knew about it very much, everybody else did, but he especially knew something about it. He told me that he was really concerned that he would get arrested in Dallas, and that actually they had made him, he said probably was a test, because they had him stand out there with a Viva Castro sign on his chest, and he was handing out stuff. And the police came by and they were going to arrest him, but they took him in. And anyway, something happened and they let him go. He was able to make a contact. And but he said, now I cannot stay in Dallas. And he said, I was so concerned when they asked me to do that, because the police were just out to find any suspect. again, who might have shot at Walker, and here they're having me put this Viva Castro sign. And yes, it was in some newspaper articles and so on. That really happened. It's in the Mary Farrell Index and so on. And he told me. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that Lee immediately after fulfilling this, and because the police noticed him, that's when he also got rid of his driver's license, I believe, because he said they marked it that he was a communist on, and then he felt like he should never drive. So he got rid of the license. This license was seen and found, but it vanished as well. But we have witnesses, worked with a DMV, and they said that it existed. So here's Lee. He's very concerned and has George and Morenschild and his wife come over. It's Easter Sunday, but he had to make this demonstration, and he has them come over. And if they come over at 10 o'clock at night, the excuse they bring a stuffed bunny, for little Junie as a gift for Easter. Come on, it's a little late, isn't it? But they had to have an excuse. And so that's when he told George, who was going to be transferred to Haiti, look, I'm going to get a new handler. Before I have to deal with that, I said, you got to get me out of here. I want to go to New Orleans. So it's not in the Warren Commission's version. It's Marina. Why would she even think of it? Why? Who says, Lee, you can't seem to find a job. So why don't you just go on and move to New Orleans, move us to New Orleans? Think about this, because he'd only been terminated at Jaggers Child Stovall, just a short period of time. And yet she says, move to New Orleans. Yeah, she thought that up, right? Okay.
The earlier warning about a Chicago plot was from a Lee. Can you confirm whether that was Lee Oswald? And if so, how would he know about a Chicago plot if he's living in Dallas?
All right. First of all, David Ferry, it's interesting how I'm going to go there first. David Ferry actually got involved with the military, the ones that really hated Kennedy, because the retired military officers of the Second World War or whatever it was, they met for their inaugural and their brand new meeting. And by the way, they had him speak twice. So remember that, because the first time he spoke is right after the Bay of Pigs thing. So we're talking about, that was just after July, mid-July and end of July and so on. And he's saying, somebody's going to go and shoot Kennedy, behind bushes somewhere. They're going to get him. He's in that open car. And they made him get off the stage. But after the speech was over and the meeting was over, a number of these retired officers came around and said, we feel the same way. We realize you're a talented pilot. We know you're a patriot. Maybe you'd like to help us get rid of Kennedy. And that started a whole series of connections of David Ferry, and he continued to pretend that he disliked Kennedy. They told us, he soon found out it wasn't Kennedy's fault about Bay of Pigs and what happened. It was CIA's fault. And then he realized these military officers were all against Kennedy, and he had these insider. Now he and Mary Sherman, who was from Chicago, between the two of them, they found out a lot. Lee did also, and he was able, he's told me, he didn't mention Chicago. He said, I believe I saved Kennedy's life 3 weeks ago, but the Chicago incident happened 3 weeks earlier.
How would he know living in Dallas?
Well, no, I mean, of course, I didn't know about the Chicago incidents years and years later, but I certainly reported that he said, and he would not kind of brag. So he didn't say I saved, he said, I believe I saved Kennedy's life 3 weeks ago. He said, all right, whatever else I have to do, and I can't run. He said, I've done what I can, and maybe I can still do something to save him. He said, isn't that worth dying for? He said, that's worth dying for.
Thank you.
Is that all we got?
That's what the time is.
All right. Wish I could say more, and I don't think you want to hear more. God bless you, and I'm grateful. I'm not going to be coming live anymore. I'm getting to the point where I've got poetry and books to write, and I believe that God wants me to do a more balanced life. I've done what I can. I'm going to be talking forever, and I'll be doing interviews. The book is coming out, Lee Harvey Oswald and Me. And I'm asking all of you, if you would, to remember me in your prayers, and I will remember you. And I will always be speaking like by Zoom or something like that. But I'm getting to where I can't walk without stumbling over something. I've got to get my eyes fixed. Thank you for listening. God bless you all. I love you.
Shannon's got a question.
Judith, we've had several people ask 2 questions. One is, the DVDs you will post on the conference website when they're available and how to purchase it.
Yes, we will put up on the website. The DVDs are $40 and they will be, but it takes them a couple months to make them.
Yes.
Poor Randy and all them. How long would it take to make them? I can't see your hand.
It's going to average
1 month. We're going to have them 1 month, folks. We're going to tell everybody. And these, along with the books, the new book, Lee Harvey Oswald and Me, is updated with new witnesses, new evidence. I keep coming up. People keep coming to me. If you know and saw me with Lee, please don't say, wait until I die. And then you could tell me that's no good. Tell me now, because they're out there. I've read several of them already. Just please stop being afraid. All the bad guys are almost all of them are dead now. All that's left are those old bad media guys.
The second question is if, and this came through Facebook, if people wanted to continue to make donations to defray the cost of the convention.
Yeah.
that we had here.
Yes.
It's the same PayPal address you posted on the website.
All right, yes, you can make donations for the conference. The conference is going to go on, and the JFK Remembrance Ceremony is going to go on every year. We're going to make sure that as long as we have breath. And so it's JFK Conference at yahoo.com.
JFK Conference or JFK Dallas?
If you want to correspond with me, you can go to, or send a donation to help me. That'd be nice, but you don't have to. But it could be, that's JFK Conferences at gmail.com. For the conference, which we want to continue and have all of you hear more, we are, as you see, we bring in the voices that you don't hear elsewhere, that need to be heard. And they're not suppressed here and they're not censored. I don't like everything to say all the time, but they're not censored.
So I need to clarify, because on the website it says JFK.
So it's JFK Conferences
Okay.
at gmail.com for me. It's JFK Conference at yahoo.com for the conference.
Okay, because the website on the website says JFK Dallas Conferences at Gmail.
No, that's the website. I'm talking about the email address where they can
Okay.
make donations using
We'll
PayPal.
clarify it on the website later.
Remember, the website, you can't, when you make a donation or payment to PayPal, you have to give an email address. And so that email address for PayPal for the conference is JFK Conference at yahoo.com. If you want to help me and get the book, if you get one of my books, for example, you would write to JFK Conferences at gmail.com.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everybody.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Judyth Berry Baker.
Bye-bye.
In summation, what I want to say is, if you haven't read Me and Lee, read it. If you've read it and haven't, read it again. If you haven't watched The Men Who Killed Kennedy, episode 8, in which Judyth is featured, if you haven't watched it, it's on YouTube, watch it. And if you've watched it, watch it again. Get her book, Lee Harvey Oswald and Me, read it, learn about the depth of their relationship and what he and she were up to. If possible, join us tomorrow at Daily Plaza. If possible, join us, Judyth, at Lee's gravesite. It'll mean the world to her. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's been my honor to be your MC this weekend, to work with our AV team, Randy Benson, Bob Little on sound. Peter, yeah, thank you. I'm having a brain. Peter Hymans on AV, Shanna Gale Willis, and all of you here, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this historic 2021 JFK Assassination Conference. Good night.
Good night.